Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. It's great to have you online today. It's going to be an exciting conversational debate which we are going to be having today, and it is presented by the South African Debate Initiative. My name is Dave Gilchrist, based in Sydney, Australia, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's debate. Just a reminder of our topic. Our topic is what the Qur'an says about crucifixion. And I would like to be starting off today by introducing our speakers. So firstly to Dr. Shabir Ali. Great to see you again, Shabir.
Thank you.
Shabir Ali holds an MA and PhD degree in Quranic interpretation from the University of Toronto and a BA in religious studies from Laurentian University. He has taught courses at the University of Toronto on the Arabic language, Islamic studies, and interfaith relations. As a faith leader, he explains his faith on a weekly television program called Let the Qur'an Speak. He often represents Islam in public lectures and interfaith dialogues. It's great to have you, Shabir.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Then move on to Samuel Green, Reverend Samuel Green. It's great to see you, Samuel. Good evening in Australia.
It's great to be with you. Thanks, Dave.
So Samuel Green became a Christian while at university and has been involved in various Christian ministries. Since 1999, he has worked with the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students as a campus evangelist and Islamic engagement director. He is a writer for the Answering Islam website and an Anglican interfaith chaplain. Engaging with Islam is one of Samuel's main interests, and he does this through writing, through training, evangelism, lectures, and debates. Samuel has degrees in theology and chemical engineering. It's great to have you, Samuel. Moving on to Yusuf Ismail. Yusuf, good afternoon in South Africa. It's great to see you.
Good afternoon, Dave. It's always good to speak to you.
So Yusuf Ismail is a trial court criminal defense lawyer based in South Africa and operating in the courts in the rural regions of KwaZulu-Natal, where he provides legal services and is a trial court defense counsel to the indigent. He considers himself a student on religion in general, with a specific emphasis on Islam and Christianity. He is the founder of the South African Debate Initiative, which focuses on hosting and initiating debates and conversations on religion and contemporary issues. He has been debating Christian apologists and preachers for more than a decade, and he has a degree in commerce and law. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Rudolf Bossoff. Good afternoon, Rudolf. It's great to see you again in South Africa.
Good to see you, Dave, and good to see everyone.
So Rudolf has a full-time vocational ministry for the last 22 years and is the director of Ad Lucem Ministries. This ministry facilitates conversations between Christians and Muslims from all over the world in South Africa. In addition, Rudolf works at the South African Theological Seminary, teaching various courses on Islam from bachelor's to master's level. He's also a senior lecturer at Rhema Bible College, teaching theology, and was appointed associate dean back in 2019. Rudolf, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the honor.
We're going to move on to just a quick overview of the structure today for the conversational debate. What we will do is begin with opening statements of 20 minutes each, first from Dr. Shabir, then from Reverend Samuel. We'll then move into opening statements of 12 minutes each from Yusuf and from Rudolf. We will then move into a time of rebuttals of 10 minutes each, first Shabir, then Samuel, and then rebuttals from Yusuf and Rudolf, which will be 7 minutes each. We then move into a time of cross-examination, which will be 10 minutes each. So the session in total will be 20 minutes. The first 10 minutes, Shabir and Yusuf will be asking Samuel and Rudolf questions. And the second 10 minutes is then Samuel and Rudolf asking Shabir and Yusuf questions. We then move into closing statements, 3 minutes each, first Rudolph and then Yusuf, and then finally closing statements of 4 minutes each, first from Samuel and then from Shabir. Now, before we start, what I would like to do is just contextualize our time together today. So I will be starting with reading from the Qur'an. I will be reading a section which is relevant to our discussion today from Surah 4, verses 153 to 159. And I'll be reading in English from Assad's translation. So I will start at verse 153. The followers of the Old Testament demand of thee, O prophet, that thou cause a revelation to be sent down to them from heaven. And an even greater thing than this did they demand of Moses when they said, make us see God face to face. Whereupon the thunderbolt of punishment overtook them for this, their wickedness. After that, they took to worshipping the golden calf. And this after all the evidence of the truth had come unto them. Nonetheless, we efface this sin of theirs and vouchsafed unto Moses a clear proof of the truth, raising Mount Sinai high above them in witness of their solemn pledge. And we said unto them, enter the gate humbly. And we told them, do not break the Sabbath law. And we accepted from them a modest, most solemn pledge. And so we punished them for breaking their pledge, and their refusal to acknowledge God's messages, and their slaying of prophets against all right, and their boast, our hearts are already full of knowledge. Nay, but God has sealed their hearts in result of their denial of the truth, and now they believe in but few things. And for their refusal to acknowledge the truth and the awesome calumny which they utter against Mary, and their boast, behold, we have slain the Christ Jesus, son of Mary, who claimed to be an apostle of God. However, they did not slay him, and neither did they crucify him, but it only seemed to them as if they had been so. And verily, those who hold conflicting views thereon are indeed confused, having no real knowledge thereof, and following mere conjecture. For of a certainty they did not slay him. God exalted him unto himself, and God is indeed almighty, wise. Yet there is not one of the followers of earlier revelation who does not, at the moment of their death, grasp the truth about Jesus, and on the day of resurrection he himself shall bear witness to the truth against them. So we're going to move into the debate itself, and we're going to start off with the opening statements. And so, Shabir, I'm going to hand over to you to start proceedings, and you will have 20 minutes for your opening statement.
Sure. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, gentlemen, for being in this panel with me. I begin by praising our Creator and Fashioner, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, and I ask God to send peace and blessings upon all of his prophets, his messengers, all of the righteous people of all time. I ask him to bless us all here tonight and bless this meeting so that out of this meeting comes a better understanding between Muslims and Christians, so that we all individually get a better understanding of that truth which God wants us to embrace for our eternal salvation. Thank you all again. Thank you, Yusuf, for inviting me. My thanks to South African Debate Initiative. Thank you, Rudolph and Reverend Samuel, for sharing your thoughts with me on this platform. And thank you, Dave, for so kindly hosting us again. And let me begin then my presentation in which I look at what the Quran says about the crucifixion, for that is our topic today. So I will argue for what seems to me the best view, and that is that Jesus was on the cross, but he was taken down alive. Moreover, that God raised him to heaven, and this explains why his tomb was found to be empty. Now, I want to begin by looking at the principles of Quranic exegesis, because any exegesis of the Quran has to be based on solid principles. Muslim scholars insist that we cannot just simply let the exegete have free rein to offer his or her opinion. It must not be based on opinion, but it must be based on principles of exegesis. So first principle that other verses of the Quran must be brought to bear on the verse that we're trying to explain. Two, the explanations based on the sayings and life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, must be incorporated. Three, in other words, we're looking at hadith. And three, we must take into consideration how the early generations of Muslims understood the Quran, except that we should distinguish between what we can presume that they learned from our Prophet, peace be upon him, and what they may have picked up from their environment, including what they learned from Jewish and Christian informers. And four, we should take into consideration the Arabic language and how it was understood at the time. Because the languages evolve over time, so we have to look for the meanings of words, not only as we can understand them today, but first and foremost, how these words were and statements were understood and used in the time of the revelation. And five, the historical background. We must consider what Muslim scholars term the asbabun nuzul, or the circumstances of revelation. For that helps us to understand what the Quran was talking about. So these are my 5 principles, and let's proceed with these principles to see what the Quran has to say. So the first principle you will recall is that the Quran interprets itself. So the statement, "they killed him not," hardly requires any exegesis, but the statement, "nor did they crucify him," requires some explanation. The word for crucifixion in Arabic is salb. Let's go to other verses of the Quran that use the same word. In the Quran 7:124, the Pharaoh threatened the believers with crucifixion. There, Yusuf Ali translated the word to mean, "cause you all to die on the cross." Abdul Majid Daryabadi, in his Tafsir al-Quran, followed the traditional substitution theory, but he defined the word salb in an endnote as follows: crucifixion is the act of putting to death by nailing on a cross. But if crucifixion means death by a particular method, why would the Quran say they killed him not, nor put him to death in this particular method? Or by this particular method? Wouldn't the general denial of his killing render the second statement redundant? This is one of the reasons why the classical Muslim exegetes went for the meaning of crucifixion as the mere placing of the person on the cross. So to them, the Quran denied that Jesus was killed and denied that Jesus was even placed on the cross. However, often in the Quran, terms which have overlapping meanings are used in juxtaposition, such as to limit the meanings of some of the terms to make room for the others. So, for example, let's consider this verse. Those who believe and do deeds of righteousness and establish regular prayers and regular charity will have their reward with their Lord. On them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. That's in Surah 2, verse 277. Now, let's think about that. So it mentions the deeds of righteousness, namely good deeds, and then it says, and establish prayer and give charity regularly. So let's think about that. As it's clear to everyone, praying and giving charity are good works. So why would the verse say good works and prayer and charity? The answer is that among all good works, prayer and charity are to be highlighted. It's as if the Quran is saying good works in general and prayer and charity in particular. In a similar way, the Quran seems to be saying they didn't kill him in general, nor did they kill him by the particular method of crucifixion. A similar juxtaposition of the two terms, to kill and crucify, is found in another verse. Look at this verse. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive with might and main for mischief through the land is execution, or crucifixion, or the cutting of hands and feet, cutting off of hands and feet from opposite sides, or exile from the land. That is their disgrace in this world, and the heavy punishment is theirs in the life hereafter. Now, this gives the judge a leeway to decide based on the magnitude of the crime and the circumstances to choose one of the four options which are here. And notice that among the options is crucifixion and execution. So execution first, crucifixion the second option. So how can there be two different options if the meaning is overlapping, as we've seen? The classical Muslim commentaries on this verse differ as to whether the crucifixion should be of a live person leading to death or a dead person who has been executed by other means. But the verse clearly offers a choice between killing and crucifixion. Hence, it clearly means killing by ordinary means or by the extraordinary means of crucifixion, depending on the gravity of the crime. In a similar way, Quran 4 verse 157 about Jesus is saying that they didn't kill him by ordinary means or by the extraordinary means of crucifixion. That explanation is supported by the way Quran 4 157 ends, where it says, they slew him not for certain, if I pick the wording from the study Quran. That conclusion to the verse indicates that this was this is what the whole verse was about. They did not succeed in their wish to have Jesus executed. Let's consider for a moment the second principle, the second interpretive principle, that we should interpret the verse in the light of what our prophet, peace be upon him, said and did. Unfortunately, there is no hadith, no report from the prophet explaining this verse or explaining what happened to Jesus. There are numerous hadiths mentioning that Jesus will return as a just ruler. This is compatible with the common Muslim belief that God is somehow preserving Jesus in heaven and that he will descend in the future. But no hadith tells us whether Jesus or a substitute was on the cross. Turning to the third principle, we have reports from early Muslims saying that God raised Jesus while a substitute was made to look like Jesus and crucified in his stead. But such reports differ from each other as to when such a switch occurred, who was switched, and whether or not the resemblance was due to supernatural intervention. After surveying many such reports, the great commentator Ar-Razi said, these reports are mutually conflicting and contradictory, whereas God knows the truth of the matter. Razi holds that the Quran denies that Jesus was on the cross. He just cannot decide how the switch occurred. The key question for our third principle, however, is whether or not the early Muslims derived their information on this matter from the Prophet, peace be upon him, or whether they got it from their environment and from their Jewish and Christian friends. Since they do not attribute the knowledge to the Prophet, peace be upon him, we are left to wonder. However, it seems likely that the early Muslims started with a fairly literal rendering of Quran 4:157, which they understood, from which they understood three things. One, that Jesus was not killed. Two, that Jesus was not hoisted onto a cross. And three, that someone was made to look like Jesus. Starting with these three givens, they listened to the gospel stories and tried to identify a point in the story at which someone else could have been switched for Jesus without being noticed. The result is the common substitution theory. But where did they get the idea that someone was made to look like Jesus? This brings us to the fourth principle, the Arabic language. The statement in question is given in the passive shubbiha lahum, which simply means it was made to seem so to them. As can be seen from numerous translations of the Quran, example Yusuf Ali, that's the term that's the way it's rendered in Yusuf Ali, that was made to seem so to them. But because the verb involved, it can mean that one person is made to resemble another, the early Muslims took it in this vein. They would thus render the verse to mean he, that is the crucified man, was made to look like him, that is Jesus, for them, for the viewers. However, the crucified man in this scenario was not mentioned yet in the verse. So how can the implied pronoun refer to him? So of course, this is a problem, and the Muslim exegetes found their own way of dealing with that. So their answer is that the pronoun does not. Their answer is that even though the crucified man was not mentioned yet, in a way, like he's like mentally he is implied. Like we know this is what is being spoken about. It's the crucified man who was made to look like Jesus. But that means they're reading their conclusion into the verse. My answer would be that the pronoun does not refer to the crucified man. In the passive, the verb shubbiha lahum means it appeared so in their minds. So the passive form of this verse has an impersonal meaning. This is one of the meanings actually acknowledged by al-Zamakhshari and al-Razi in their commentaries, and by Lane in his lexicon while explaining the term khuyyila lahum, which he said is the synonym of shubbiha and means so they imagined it in their minds. Unfortunately, although al-Razi and al-Zamakhshari acknowledged this as one of the meanings of the term, they did not go the route of making it an impersonal expression. They took the view that someone else was crucified instead of Jesus. Coming finally to the fifth principle. What precisely happened to Jesus as a matter of history? So, in other words, remember that the fifth principle is that we must know the background, what is called the asbabun nuzul, the circumstances of revelation. If we don't know what happened on the ground, we can't know what the Quran is referring to. So we must explore what actually happened to Jesus. So this is the fifth principle. The canonical Gospels say that Jesus died on the cross, that he was placed in the tomb, that the tomb was found empty, that Jesus began to appear to his disciples, and eventually was raised to heaven. The topic of our discussion today is not about the validity of all of these gospel statements, but only about the meaning of Quran 4:157. Hence, I don't intend to dispute the gospels, but only to explain the Quran, for which I need to establish the historical background in keeping with the fifth principle of Quranic exegesis. To me, this is what the Quran is doing in Surah 4, verse 157 and 158. It is just saying that, as I would translate it here roughly, and they are saying, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary. They did not kill him, not even by crucifixion, though it was made to seem so to them. Rather, they who differ about the matter are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it, except that they follow some supposition, whereas they did not kill him for certain, but God raised him to himself. God is mighty, wise. Now, my slides end here, but I have a few more minutes, so I'm going to look at a few other verses of the Quran that may be brought into this discussion. So one verse is in the 5th chapter of the Quran, where in verse 116 we have God speaking with Jesus, and just a few verses before that, God says to Jesus, remember, وَإِذْ كَفَفْتُكَ بني إسرائيل عنك إذ جئتهم بالبينات فقال الذين كفروا منهم إن هذا إلا سحر مبين. And so when we withheld the people of Israel from you, in other words, we protected you from them, when you came to them with the clear evidence and they said, this is nothing but clear magic. Some Muslim exegetes would argue on the basis of this verse that this proves that Jesus wasn't even put on the cross because according to this verse, God protected him from the people. But when there is a promise like this in the Quran that God protects either in the future, or there is this statement about the past that God protected you, it doesn't mean that he must have protected you in all circumstances from all possible harm. There may be something more specific in mind. And of course, we know from the Gospels that on many occasions, the Jews attempted to harm Jesus, but sometimes Jesus slipped through the crowd, as in Luke's Gospel, or in other cases, there was an explanation rendered, and the Jews withheld their hand. Well, from a naturalistic point of view, we would say they withheld their hands, but from a theological perspective, we can say that God prevented any harm to come to Jesus on those occasions. It does not by itself prove, though of course we can give credence to that. One might presume that that would mean that no harm came to Jesus at all. But if we have good evidence that, for example, that Jesus was on the cross, but he was taken down alive, then we would interpret that verse to mean that God protected Jesus from the ultimate. So they wanted to put him to death, but God protected him so that he was not killed. The idea that Jesus was on the cross might also call into question the statement that he speaks about his death. So he says in the 19th chapter of the Quran, "Wassalamu alayya yawma amutu wa yawma ub'athu hayya." Peace upon me the day I shall die, and then I'll be raised alive. So some say, well, this must mean that Jesus already died. But of course, no. Muslim commentators do not say that, but sometimes our Christian friends will bring this up. But we point out that this is in the future. At the time of Jesus speaking this, he's speaking about his death to occur in the future. And that could still occur in the future, especially in the light of Muslim belief that Jesus will return, and at that time he will die. Now, whereas this verse mentions the term amut, which a verb which definitely means die, there are verses in the Quran which mention another term, tawaffa, which could mean to take. And so we have, for example, in Surah 3, verse number 55, it's called Allahu ya Isa inni mutawaffika wa rafi'uka ilayya. When we said to Jesus, we are going to take you and raise you to ourselves, or raise you to myself. I'm going to take you and raise you to myself. So the taking here could be a euphemism for death, but it doesn't certainly mean death. It could be an expression meaning that God takes the soul in sleep, as we find, for example, in Surah Zumar, the 39th chapter of the Quran, that God takes the souls while they sleep and then return the souls to the bodies as we wake up. Or of course, God can take the soul in death as well, according to the same verse. So that means that this verse, Surah 3, verse 55, and also Surah 5, verse 118, having a similar expression, leaves some ambiguity as to whether Jesus was taken in sleep or in death. And some commentators on the Quran will say that Jesus died, and some others will say that he was taken in sleep. Now, even if Jesus was taken up in sleep, as Razi pointed out, from a historical point of view, it would appear to everyone that Jesus died, because the man was here and he's no longer here. History will have it that, somebody who used to live 2,000 years ago and is no longer here, he must presume to have died. He must be presumed to have died. So from a historical point of view, it might be taken to mean that Jesus died, but Muslims can assert that God took Jesus from this world in a way that is mysterious, but nonetheless, God preserves him, and God will send him back into the world for another occasion. So in short, the Quranic verse, Surah 4, verse 157, does not, in my humble estimation, given my 5 principles of exegesis, deny that Jesus was on the cross, but it denies that the Jews killed him or crucified him, meaning that it did not finish the job of executing him by the means of crucifixion. Thank you all very much.
Dr. Shabir, thank you very much for your opening statement. We're going to move into Samuel now. Samuel, you will have 20 minutes for your opening statement, and let me know when you'd like me to pull up your slides. Samuel, you're on mute.
Okay, so I'm there. So I you should be hearing me now.
Loud and clear.
If you can pull up my slides, that would be great. Well, it's great to be with everyone today, and I do want to thank Yusuf and Dr. Shabir Ali for being with us to discuss this important subject, and for Rudolf for working with me and partnering with me in this today. As we look at this important question of what does the Quran say about the crucifixion? And I hope that whether you're Christian or Muslim, that you'll find this helpful so that we can deal with each other's texts honestly and just to start with where we need to start by at least understanding what the books say. Well, I'll get straight into it. To answer the question, what does the Quran say about the crucifixion, involves carefully reading the Quran. Now, many of my assumptions are actually the same as Dr. Shabir's. I'd like to add one here, and my first assumption would be that the Quran is a unified whole, and so it needs to be understood together. All the verses need to be understood together. And it also claims to be clear and that it can be understood. And so they're my working assumptions. The structure of what I'm going to say today is I'm going to look at verses 157 to 158, then 355 and 517. I'll evaluate some other explanations and then look at 2 objections. Now, the Quran the crucifixion is mentioned in 3 places in the Quran. However, nearly all attention is given to the following verses. They, the unbelievers, said, "We killed Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, the apostle of God. But they killed him not, nor crucified him. But so it was made to appear to them. And those who differ about this are full of doubts, with no knowledge, but only assumption to follow. For of certainty they killed him not, rather God raised him to himself." Now, these verses are generally said to be a denial of the crucifixion, but there are 2 reasons why this is not the case. My first reason is that the verses themselves do not explicitly say Jesus did not die. Instead, they say that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they did not. Now, that's saying something a little different. The verses actually do not tell us what it appeared like to the disciples or to the Romans. It's quite explicit, saying lahum, to them, that is, to the unbelievers, it appeared this way. To say that it appeared to others in the same way is actually reading beyond the text. And the verses themselves do not actually say that Jesus was taken bodily. Now, we see this in Abdul Madudi. He says, "The Quran explicitly states that the Jews did not succeed in putting Jesus to death and that Allah raised him to himself. But it is silent about the nature and details of the matter and does neither say explicitly whether Allah raised him body and soul together from the earth to some place in heaven, or that he died like other mortals and only his soul was raised to heaven. Therefore, on the basis of the Quran, neither aspect can be definitely denied or affirmed." So I just want to point out there that verses chapter 4, 157 to 158 are not a direct denial of the crucifixion. They say that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they did not, but that instead God raised him to himself. So that's my first reason why these verses aren't saying that Jesus was crucified and killed. My second reason is that there are 2 other verses which speak about the crucifixion, and they actually say that Jesus' soul was taken or that he died. And if the Quran is a consistent whole, these must be considered. So we've got this in Surah 3:55. "And when God said to Jesus, 'I am going to take you and raise you to me.' And then in 5:117, 'I, Jesus, was a witness over them as long as I was among them. When you took me, it was you who were a watcher over them.'" Now, this word tawafa in Arabic, where it's translated took, what does this word mean? Now, this is something that you can do, and we've got these resources these days where you can look up every reference to a word in the Quran. And in the case of tawafa, there are 24 references to this word. Now, that is more than enough to see how this word is used, what its purpose is, and what it means. And on every other occasion, outside of 3:55 and 3:117, it means taking of the soul and death. Taking of the soul, particularly the taking of the soul at death. I'm just going to do these quickly now because there's 22, but I want you to see that you can actually do this. So let's look at a few of these. And those who are taken in death among you and leave wives behind. So Lord, our Lord, so forgive our sins and remove from us our misdeeds and cause us to die with the righteous. And if they testify, confine the guilty women to houses until death takes them or Allah ordains a different way. Indeed, those whom the angels take in death while wronging themselves. I'll just do one from each of these slides because there's actually 22 of them. Our Lord, pour upon us patience and let us die as Muslims. That's the word tawafa. And if you could but see when the angels take the souls of those who are delivered, whether you show some of what we promise them, or we take you in death. I worship Allah who causes your death, and it's this word tawafa, who takes you. I'll go down again. And whether we show you part of what we promise them, or take you in death, the ones whom the angels take in death. And Allah created you, then he will take you in death. These are all references to this word tawafa, but it keeps going. And who among you is he who is taken in death? I'll just skip down to the bottom because I can't do all of them, but you can stop the slides and look at this on the video later on. And among you is he who is taken in death before. And whether we show you some of what we have promised them, or we take you in death, then how will it be when the angels take them in death, striking their faces and their backs? Now, I just want to say, when you go and read the other 22 references of this word, we see that on every occasion, tawafa means taking of the soul in death. There's one where it's talking about taking of the soul while you're asleep, but even that is called the minor death in Islamic theology. And so this word tawafa, it's not used for any other purpose than the taking of the soul. That's what the word is for, the taking of the soul in death. That's what the word is used. Now, this is actually confirmed because Imam Bukhari, in his Kitab al-Tafsir, when he's referring to Surah 5, verse 117, he actually makes reference. He's got like a glossary note. He's got some notes between the hadiths, and he puts those in there to help you understand the hadiths. And this is what he writes when he wants to explain Surah 5, 117, which is about God taking Jesus. He writes that Mutawafiki in Surah 355, according to Ibn Abbas, is referring to death. And so I'll just go up to here. And there are translators who translate it this way. This is a Sunni translator. Recall when Allah said, O Isa, surely I will make thee die and am lifting thee to me. And then we had at the start of this, we had a translation by Muhammad Asad, I believe. And this is how he translates Surah 355. Lo, God said, O Jesus, verily I shall cause thee to die and shall exalt thee to me. And this is referring to the crucifixion event. We see this again when Allah said, O Jesus, I will cause thee to die and exalt thee in my presence. Now, I haven't been able to get my hands on it, but I believe that Yusuf Ali also in his first edition translated it this way. Therefore, verses 355 and 5:117, which are also talking about the crucifixion when Jesus is taken, they are saying that Jesus was taken in death. And there are no grounds for understanding and translating the verses any other way, because that's how the word is used on every other occasion in the Quran, and it's used enough times to see that that's its use and that that's its only use. So to summarize so far, what does the Quran say about the crucifixion? Well, 4:157 to 158 says that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they did not. Rather, God raised him to himself. And 3:55 and 5:117 can only mean that God took Jesus' life on the cross. So it was God who took Jesus' life, not the unbelievers who were trying to kill him. So therefore the Quran says, I've got it here. Therefore the Quran says it was God who took Jesus' life on the cross, not the unbelievers, though it did appear to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus. Now, again, I'm just trying to interpret the Quran by itself here, letting its own verses be consistent and understanding the verses and the words as the Quran presents them. Now, what I've said to you, I've just done from my own work, because I don't want to dispower people and thinking that you can't understand the Bible or the Quran. We've got many great tools these days, and you can read these things and do this research yourself. But what I've been saying here is also just the view of Gabriel Sade Reynolds, and I've given you the reference where you could look that up in him as well. Now, I'll keep moving along. I want to evaluate now some other explanations. And at this point, I actually agree a fair bit with Dr. Shabir Ali. He was critiquing the substitution theory that somebody was substituted for Jesus and they appeared to be like him when it was in fact someone else. And this is the classical explanation from, you would see this with Ibn Kathir. But as we've seen, the verses do not mention a substitute. They just don't say that. It just says, it appeared to them. Now, exactly what that means is the question, but it doesn't specifically say there was somebody in Jesus' place. That idea comes from early Christian interpreters who read the Quran in a docetic sense. And so the early Christians would have read the Quran and gone, oh, that's docetism, where there's a substitute for Jesus or something like that. And we know that this type of thing did happen with the hadiths. And there are many of these hadiths, not from Muhammad, but from different people, and they give different reasons for why it happened, different people being substituted and on different occasions. And none of the Sahih collectors actually include them. And I also want to point out that the majority of the Muslim apologists I see today don't accept the substitution theory. There is also the idea that nobody was crucified. Some will suggest that the whole thing was a vision, or that it was just a myth that developed in time. Now, again, there's no evidence in here that it's a vision. Certainly in the Quran, God does give visions, but there's no indication in these verses that it is a vision. The Jews are saying that it's something that they saw and that they're claiming to have done, not a vision that they saw. And the idea that it's a myth that developed really defies the logic of history, because the early Christians had to explain the death of Jesus. It was actually something embarrassing in a sense to them that was a stumbling block to people. It's not something that you would invent. It's something you had to explain, not something you would invent. So the idea that it's a myth that developed really has no grounds at all. And it's certainly not mentioned in the text saying that it's a myth that developed. Shabir's already outlined his position to us, so I won't need to go in there, that Jesus was crucified but not unto death and survived. And I think I've understood that one correctly. An interesting one is that the Quran, and so, this comes from the Encyclopedia of Islam. The Quran is describing the death of Jesus as the death of a martyr. This is based on the Quran's teaching that martyrs only appear to be dead and that their souls are taken directly to Allah. And so for Cyril Glacy, he just puts it forward as a suggestion that this is a helpful way forward to see that the Quran's teaching on martyrs seems to be a description, seems to be the background for understanding what's happening to Jesus. And I think that there's something in that, because Jesus is certainly in a martyr type of position here, and this may well be what it's referring to. Let me see, martyr, that's the next one here. Okay, I want to look at a couple of objections now. One of the objections that I've heard from Muslims is that Allah would not let his prophet be killed. And when I've raised this subject of the crucifixion, Muslims have said Allah would not let one of his prophets be killed. But clearly there are other verses in the Quran, which I've put here, where prophets are killed. And it's one of the charges against the unbelieving Jews. So that objection doesn't work. The other objection is that Jesus is coming back. And so because he's coming back, he couldn't have died on the cross because he's got to come back to die later. Now, in one sense, Jesus could have died on the cross and then be raised up and then will come back to die later. He could be an exception, and God could do that. But there's no mention of the return of Jesus in the Quran. And so if we just let the Quran interpret itself, we don't really have to bring in the idea of Jesus coming back to make sense of the Quran. We could interpret it and just say, let's see what it says. And it makes, I want to argue, it makes perfect sense on itself. There are a couple of three references that people use to say that the Quran says that Jesus is coming back and therefore he couldn't have died on the cross. But 159 is not talking about Jesus' death. I'll just read it to you. No, God raised Jesus to himself. There is not one of the people of the scripture, but will truly believe before his death. Now, before his death there, that's not talking about Jesus' death. That's talking about the Jew who rejects Jesus. And it's saying they reject Jesus right up to their death. It's certainly, there's nothing in there saying Jesus will return. The next one would be Surah 43, verse 61, where it says, he or it is knowledge concerning the hour. Have no doubt about it, but follow me. This is the straight path. Now, again, the context here is the straight path is the Quran, following the words of Allah in the Quran. And again, the verse does not say Jesus is coming back. And there are many other Islamic scholars who would agree with this. And finally, another one I've seen is where people say that Jesus speaks in the cradle and in maturity, and that, for him to speak in maturity just means he's got to speak in old age, and so he's got to come back to be old. Now, the problem with that is that you're interpreting the Quran by the Bible, which in one sense I'm happy to do. And so they want to say, well, Jesus was about 30 when he died, therefore he's not old. Well, the word maturity there doesn't mean old age. That's a different way of saying it in the Quran. And so, again, this verse just doesn't say Jesus is coming back. It just doesn't say he's coming back. It's saying he spoke in the cradle. He spoke when he was growing up. That makes perfect sense. So, there's nothing in the Quran to say that Jesus has got to come back. That's an idea from the Hadith that we bring into the Quran and then is used to interpret what the verses mean. What I'm saying is, if we let the Quran be its first interpreter, there's nothing in there to say that that Jesus is coming back. And in fact, what I've said here makes better sense of the rest of the Quran if Jesus his life was taken by God on the cross, because Jesus and John's lives are paralleled in the Quran. Listen to how John's life is described. Peace be upon John, the day he was born, the day he dies, and the day he is raised up alive. Now, Jesus' life is explained in exactly the same way. Peace be upon me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I shall be raised alive. So John and Jesus' lives are parallel. There's no thing about Jesus avoiding death or coming again. When their lives are given in a summary statement, they're parallel lives. And so again, this makes sense of just God taking Jesus' life on the cross. So what does the Quran say about the crucifixion? The Quran speaks about the crucifixion in 3 places, and we've read these today. These say that it was God who took Jesus' life on the cross, not the unbelievers, though it did appear to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Samuel. We're going to move into the opening statements from Yusuf and Rudolph. Yusuf will be going first. Yusuf, you have 12 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Am I clear here? I just want to put my timer on.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Just my time. I'm loud and clear. Okay, thank you, Dave. You are one of the best moderators I've ever had, with the exception of Rudolph, who has moderated many debates of mine. And thank you to 2 of my favorite apologists out there, Rudolph and Samuel. You are the most politest and decent and intellectual apologists I've come across, and of course Dr. Shabir Ali, who I would view as one of the best debaters in the Muslim world or amongst Muslims. It's great to be with all of you. Let's start off with this, and I've listened attentively to both Dr. Shabir and Samuel. I enjoyed what both of them stated, and I want to put this to bed, that in the Quran, whenever the word salabuhu is used, the words ma salabuhu, it occurs, it always means, in a general sense, to kill by means of crucifixion. Dr. Shabir mentioned Surah Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 33, where the term, إِنَّمَا جَزَاءُ الَّذِينَ يُحَارِبُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَسْعُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَسَادًا أَن يُقَتَّلُوا أَوْ يُصَلَّبُوا. The term is juxtaposed with the word qatal, to execute. And so in that verse, the punishment for the muharibun is that they should be either executed qatal or executed through means of crucifixion. So the words ma salabuhu, as Shabir pointed out, and we want to give you what we believe is a definitive Islamic position, is that it doesn't negative him being put on the cross. It negatives him being killed on the cross. And essentially what the Quran is doing is that it's taking a corrective position in the sense of dealing with Christian dogma and Christian belief. Because Christian belief is not that Jesus simply hanged on the cross and by means of hanging, therefore your salvation is attained. It states that he died by means of crucifixion. And so on that basis, the Quran is saying they didn't kill him in the ordinary sense, nor did they kill him by means of crucifixion. So to hang a person on a cross such that he dies thereby, that is what the Quran is denying. And I find it quite strange when Samuel made the point that the Quran doesn't say that Jesus did not die. Well, it's negativing the act of him being killed. If somebody says, well, for hypothetically, God forbid that somebody killed me or somebody killed any one of us, and we say, no, they didn't kill him, the assumption is that he didn't die, meaning he's still alive. So it's not denying that Jesus was not put on the cross. The other point is this, is that no Quranic verse can be viewed in isolation, but it has to be viewed in light of history and the facts, and certainly even indeed the biblical narratives. Now, the question that is normally being put is that how can the Quran come some 600 years later, whereas even non-Christian history, for example, purports to suggest or indicate that Jesus in fact died by crucifixion, or that historians generally agree that he died by crucifixion? Well, there are two main sources that are cited for that, non-Christian sources. One is by Tacitus and the other is by Josephus, which gives the indication of Jesus purportedly dying by crucifixion. But in regards to the quotation by Tacitus, a lot of scholars are now questioning the passage given by Tacitus on the basis that he was born about 25 years after Jesus left the world, purportedly, or after his supposed crucifixion. Scholars have debated the historical value of the passage. You've got Khair Tayson and Annette Mertz. They argued that Tacitus at times had drawn on early historical works, now lost. Michael Martins, for example, argues that the authenticity of the passage of the annals of Tacitus has been disputed, because why would Tacitus have used the term Christos? Why would he describe Jesus as a Messiah? Brent Shaw, another scholar, he argues that Tacitus was relying on Christian and Jewish legendary sources that portrayed Nero as the Antichrist. And scholars have debated the issue of hearsay in reference to Tacitus. The other one is by Josephus, the Antiquities of Josephus, by Flavius Josephus, and the reference is found in Book 18, which describes Jesus as being the Messiah who was crucified by Pontius Pilate. Now, Paul Meyer, Zvi Baras, they've stated that there are three possible perspectives on the authenticity of the testimonium. But more recently, you've got modern scholars like Kenneth Olson that's argued that the entire testimonium must have been forged by Eusebius, because there are textual similarities between the writings of Eusebius and that of the testimonium. If you look at 2012, you've got the Josephus scholar Louis Feldman. He initially had support for the partial authenticity of the testimonium, but now he proposes the idea that this passage was interpolated by Eusebius on the basis that there are key phrases in the testimonium which are used nowhere else in the entire Greek literature other than that of Eusebius. In 2014, you had Carnegie Mellon, the linguistic professor, Paul Hopper. He argued that the style and the narrative structure of the testimonium, it differs significantly from the rest of Josephus' book. And according to him, the language of the testimonium is more in common with 4th century Christian creedal statements as opposed to the works of first century authors. G.A. Wells, another author that's questioned the authenticity of the testimonium. So these are the two non-Christian sources which deal with the supposed crucifixion. And the point is that this is now becoming under scrutiny by modern day scholars that are questioning the authenticity of these particular narratives. In terms of the crucifixion, if you want to break down what it says, the Quran says very little. It says very little on the issue. And what we have is a situation of what the Quran says in terms of its denial and the biblical narrative, which purportedly gives the indication of the supposed crucifixion and death and resurrection and burial of Christ. But again, as much as Samuel raised certain points in terms of how you could construct and interpret certain positions from the Quran, if you look at the biblical narrative, it's only by combining the different statements in the four Gospels, in the Acts, in the epistles of Paul and Peter, that you can in fact have a kind of reconstruction of certain events. But even if you have a superficial examination of the text, you'd see quite clearly that there are certain problems that are sometimes overlooked. And I'll give you a classic example, the death of Jesus, because the Quran says that there's doubt. They killed him not, those who differ therein are full of doubt. Now, if you look at the doubt, and let's practically exemplify it in what we've got in the New Testament. If you look, for example, at Mark's account of the death of Jesus, Jesus and the disciples, they make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. In Mark 14:12, the disciples ask Jesus where they're to prepare the Passover meal. And in other words, it's on the day of the preparation for the Passover. And we are told that in Mark 15:25, that he's crucified on that same day at 9 o'clock. Again, in variance with the other Gospels, but on the day of the preparation for the Passover, the morning. Jesus dies on the day of the Passover, the morning after the Passover meal was eaten. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus goes to Jerusalem last week, celebrates a Passover meal, a last meal, trial, betrayal, etc. And then we are told in John 19:14 that Pilate pronounces a sentence on the day of the preparation for the Passover. Not the Passover, the day of the preparation, about noon. Again, differing with the 9 o'clock in Mark 15:25. Now, how is that so? Because in Mark's Gospel, Jesus lived through that day. He had his disciples prepare the Passover meal, ate before them, being arrested, taken to jail, 9 o'clock, etc. But in John's Gospel, Jesus dies a day earlier on the day of the preparation for the Passover, sometimes afternoon. So at the outset, there's a problem in terms of now the Gospels having a dissimilarity in terms of when did Jesus actually die? And the point being made is that when we juxtapose that with the issue of the doubt, did Jesus actually die in accordance with the Quranic refutation? We can clearly see that from John's Gospels, many scholars have pointed out that Jesus is presented as a sacrificial lamb, meaning he's now the Passover. So John distorts a historical fact to make a theological point. Jesus is the Passover. He is the, and so he has to die on the day of the preparation for the Passover, sometimes afternoon. The other point is this, gentlemen, is that prior to the crucifixion, Jesus does certain actions which shows that he's not a willing sacrifice. He takes into account the fact that in Deuteronomy 21:23, we are told that he that is hanged is accursed of God. He tells the disciples, his soul is exceedingly sorrowful unto death. He asks God to take this cup away from him. In Luke, he says, he had great agony and his sweat was great drops of blood. Now, the main question is this, is that if Jesus knew he was to die for the sins of others, why was he sorrowful unto death? Why did he pray in great agony to God to take away the cup away from him? And the answer is obvious, that he didn't know anything except that the Jews were bent on condemning him to death, which the Quran is saying the Jews never killed him. And that according to Jewish belief and his own belief as a Jew, if he died on the cross, he would have died the death of an accursed of God. So God answers his prayers in Hebrews 5:7, where it says, who in the days of his flesh, he offers up prayers, supplications, and in a manner of speaking, was saved in that he was heard, in that he feared. Now, if the prayer of Jesus was granted, then he couldn't have died on the cross itself. When you take into account the time of the death of Jesus, Matthew and Mark say it was the 9th hour. Mark says it was the 3rd hour, 9 a.m. Luke fixes it the 6th hour, about 12 a.m. And John about the 6th hour, where Pilate sat in judgment. Now, all are contradictory accounts, but at best, you could have a situation that he was on the cross at 3 hours. And this led to a surprise. Dean Farah, for example, in his Life of Christ, states that the Gnostics states that Jesus appeared to have died. Tertullian purportedly had his doubts. Origen had his doubts. There was a surprise and marvel of Pilate. Pilate marveled. He questions the centurion, showing that he wished to silence the death of his contemporaries. But more importantly, Matthew raises an incident which puts everything beyond doubt. After Jesus is placed in the sepulchre, the Pharisees come to Pilate and they ask him in Matthew 27:64, command that the sepulchre be made sure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say unto the people, he is risen from the dead. So the last error shall be worse than the first. Now the question is, what was the first error and what was the last error? The first error could not be other than Jesus had been taken off the cross much earlier than was necessary, that his bones had not been broken, unlike that of the others, and that according to them, in fact, not crucified at all. That was the first error. Therefore, they prayed that the sepulchre has to be made secure and sealed, so that even if he was buried alive, he would remain there and die of suffocation. So they, in fact, expressed their apprehension to Pilate in unambiguous terms. How does the Quran line up with the biblical narrative about the supposed eyewitnesses? Well, the one point, I know we don't have time to go into 1 Corinthians and the book of Acts and so on, but there's one feature about the alleged death of Jesus on the cross, which ties in with the Quranic narrative, and that is nowhere in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, is there a positive statement of an eyewitness recorded that Jesus, in fact, died on the cross, or that he was dead when they removed him from the cross, or placed in the tomb. None of the disciples are present. They forsook him and fled. The Jews had their own doubts. The gospel writers felt the weakness of the evidence, and therefore they were compelled to introduce the woman. And so I believe my time has come to an end, Dave. I don't know how many minutes do I have.
Yeah, you've just gone to 12 minutes, Yusuf, so your time's just finished.
So basically, just in a nutshell, just to conclude on this limited point, when the Quran says they killed him not, nor crucify him, it is negativing the act of Jesus being killed on the cross. And the doubt that you see there is certainly expressed when you tie it up and juxtapose it with the gospel narratives. And if we have more time, we'll go into that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yusuf. Thanks for your opening statement there. We're going to move into 12 minutes for Rudolf to give your opening statement. So, Rudolf, over to you.
Thanks so much. And Dave, you'll put up the presentation.
Sure.
Thanks. Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to speak openly about a text that is used by millions of people all over the world. Let me just start off and say, as a Christian and a keen scholar of Islam, I know that is not the first time, nor will this be the last time that somebody would actually discuss this topic. But when it comes to this discussion, I want to follow the instruction of two Muslim intellectuals that I've learned from. The first is Imam Jalal al-Din Abdul Rahman al-Suyuti, and he cautions scholars of the Quran to interpret its context from the basis of the Quran. He says the following, and I just want to start with this quote. He says, "It is believed that the Quran, through its guidance and divine origins, will always stand as evidence of interpreting that which is the best representation of its true meaning." In other words, he says, for a solid interpretive basis, we need to establish that which we can be interpret from the Quranic context and the Quranic content. The second scholar is Ahmad von Denver in his Ulum al-Quran, an introduction to the sciences of the Quran. And
Sorry, can I just interrupt for a moment? Can you stop the clock, Dave? I can't see Rudolph's presentation.
Rudolph,
I need to?
Yeah, neither can I. We can't view it.
There we go.
We can see it
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
Sorry, it wasn't coming up. It looks like I need to control it from my end. Sorry, if we can start the clock, just continue.
Sure.
No problem. Okay. Let me just start my clock. Okay, so I'll go from the second scholar, which is Ahmad von Denver in his Ulum al-Quran, an introduction to the sciences of the Quran. And it affirms what Shabir told us in his opening statement in his first point. The interpretation of the Quran by the Quran is the highest source of tafsir. Many of the questions that may arise out of a certain passage of the Quran have the explanation in the other parts of the very same book. And often there is no need to turn to any other sources other than the word of Allah, which in itself contains tafsir. To seek to explain an ayah from the Quran by the referral of some other ayah from the Quran is the first and foremost duty of the mufassir, or the commentators. Only if this does suffice, you will refer to the other sources of tafsir. So the main question we need to answer comes directly, as we heard from Surah Al-Nisa, that's chapter 4, verses 157 and 158. And for the sake of time, I will not read it again because I only have, I think, 10 minutes left. But let me sum up for you what the audience is supposed to ask when they look at these verses. First of all, the question, those boasting of killing and crucifying Jesus are told they did not. Second, it appears to the believers or to the unbelievers that they did. Third, those who disagree have no knowledge. And fourthly, God raised Jesus to himself. Now, let me examine these four statements and see how the Quran explains these. And I think this is very important. Number one, those boasting of killing and crucifying Jesus are told they did not. According to the Quran, what does it mean to boast of killing someone and told that you, in actual fact, did not kill him? Well, here's an example of what the Quran articulates when it speaks of the demise of some, yet it assures us that this was by the will of Allah. And those two things are very important. In Surah Al-Naf, chapter 8, 17, it says, you did not kill them, God killed them. And the second one is from Surah Waf, that's chapter 50, ayat 43. It says, it is we who give life and cause death, and to us is the journey. So here in South Africa, Dr. Farid Esak at the University of Johannesburg, he writes in his book, The Quran, a User's Guide, that Muslims merely assume that Surah Al-Nisa, chapter 4, 157, state that Jesus did not die by crucifixion. But he writes, Muslims in generally denied the crucifixion, although the Quran merely states they did not slay him and neither did they crucify him, but it only seems as if it had been so. Nay, God exalted him unto himself, and God indeed is almighty and wise. This may be a difficult, he says, to reconcile to that is the traditional understanding with Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, 117, where a conversation takes place between God and Jesus on the day of judgment, and Jesus says to God, you caused me, this is past tense, to die. So there is no reason to deny the crucifixion and to rather affirm the death of Jesus Christ, and there is therefore nothing for the Jews to boast about, as this was allowed by the will of Allah when we read the Quran's description of the crucifixion. Point number two, it appeared to the unbelievers that they did. Now, according to the Quran, what does it mean that someone or something appears to die when they did not? Well, again, in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 154, we can see that it says, do not say of those who are killed in the way of God, dead. No, they are living, but you do not perceive that. And then in Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, 169, it says, do not reckon those who were killed in God's way as dead. No, they are alive with the Lord. So what we can see from the overall context of the Quran, it seems that martyrs appear to be dead, but they are not. And we see something like this in the Quran's description of the crucifixion. Sayyid Qutb, in the shade of the Quran, comments on Surah Al-Baqarah, that's chapter 2, 154, and he writes, to all intents and purposes, those people, that is the martyrs, may very well appear lifeless, but life and death are not judged by superficial means or physical means alone. According to Islamic tradition, people who are killed for the cause of God are not washed or prepared for burial in a conventional way, but buried in the clothes they happen to be wearing, because they are considered clean and pure, and because in reality they are not dead. But who are the living martyrs? They are those killed in God's cause and in God's cause alone. So the Quranic context can accommodate this seeming tension and affirm the death of Christ and the right only for Allah to allow some to be killed. Point number three, those who disagree have no knowledge. Well, according to the Quran, what does those who disagree have no knowledge mean? Well, the Quran sees itself as the source of proper knowledge, and it tells you both the see and the unseen realm. It speaks of both the unseen realms. And it also shows us that this is exactly what we see in this case. In Surah Al-Ra'd, that's chapter 13, ayat 9, it says, Allah is the knower of the unseen, and the witness, the granted and the exalted is He. Therefore, the Quran tells us about the unseen realities of the crucifixion, where we might be ignored because we are limited by what is seen. So for us on the outside, we might not perceive the full context of what the Quran is trying to say, but the Quran is definitely not negating the fact that God is the seer of all things. Point number 4, God raised Jesus to himself. According to the Quran, what does God raise Jesus to himself mean? Well, when we read the Quranic context, when we read in Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, 157 and 158, it says, if you are killed or die in the way of God, pardon and mercy from God are better than what they collect. If you die or are killed, you'll be gathered up to God. In Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, 169, it says, do not reckon those who were killed in God's way as dead. No, they are alive with God. So, what is this saying? Well, it is saying the martyrs are taken directly to God. That is the unseen reality and not the bodily or what is seen in the physical reality. We see this in the Quran's description also of the crucifixion. So, in conclusion, we must let the Quran speak. What is the Quran saying happens on the cross? We must let the Quran interpret itself, and we must uphold the context of the Quran. This is a better explanation than what is commonly presented by some Muslims. Allah took Jesus' soul before he died, or Jesus was a martyr. One is the two options. So we are left with two key questions our opponents need to answer. Can a Muslim affirm the crucifixion? I think they can. And then what really happened to Jesus? Well, I think the context is clear. When we look at the context, we can see, first of all, those who are boasting of the killing of Jesus and that he was crucified. In actual fact, we can see quite clearly that it is many doubts from the context as to what the description of the Quran is trying to depict. It appears to unbelievers that they did not. Well, we can see quite clearly that the context shows quite clearly that it can accommodate the seeming tension of the death of Christ and only of Allah to know those who are killed and those who are actually alive with him. And then also it brings to light the very reality and the fact that Allah is the one that is seeing the unseen realities. And in this unseen reality, there's not a denial of Christ's death, yet there is an affirmation of what we can see in the overall context of the Quran about the crucifixion. I leave you with that, and that is my presentation.
Thanks very much, Rudolf. We'll take down your slides. And we will transition into the next part of the discussion, which are the rebuttals. So Shabir is going to go first with his 10-minute rebuttal, and Samuel will go next. So Shabir, we'll hand over to yourself for your rebuttal of 10 minutes.
Okay. I'm just setting my own clock here as well, David. Yeah. Okay, good. Gentlemen, I am impressed with all of your presentations, and I'll say more about this in detail as I come to each one of you. First of all, Yusuf, thank you for supporting some of the points that I made, especially with your recitation in Arabic of Quran 5:33, which shows the use of the term assault, which means crucifixion, in juxtaposition with killing, which illustrates quickly that killing and crucifixion, though having an overlapping meaning, when used together will have a distinct meaning. So killing by some ordinary means, and crucifixion would, in that case, would mean killing by the extraordinary means of crucifixion. And therefore, when we reapply that to Quran 4:157, which is about Jesus, we must have the same two meanings in mind. They did not kill him by some ordinary means, nor did they kill him by the extraordinary means of crucifixion. Now, coming to Rudolph's points, again, I'm impressed, Rudolph, with your exegesis of the Quran and your ability to tie together so many verses of the Quran, and also your reference to Muslim scholars as Suyuti and von Denver, who emphasized the same point that I made, that the Quran must be interpreted in the light of the Quran. But as I've pointed out, that's only one of the principles of Quranic interpretation. But there are other principles as well. Like, for example, interpreting the Quran in the light of what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, explained, what the earliest community understood, in the light of the Arabic language, and in the light of what actually happened in history, what the Muslim scholars refer to as the Asbabun Nuzul. And you have referred to Farid Isaac, who's cast doubt on, the idea that someone was put on the cross and other than Jesus. And of course, as you know, I also have questioned that narrative. So we're on the same page with many things there. But as for your saying that it appeared to the non-believers that they killed him, but whereas God has a different viewpoint, and it's his viewpoint that actually matters. Well, I agree with you on that too. But I would add that what actually happened was that Jesus, though being on the cross, was not actually killed on the cross. And in what manner God took him, this is not specified in the Quran, but God rescued him and raised him to himself, so they did not succeed in, his enemies did not succeed in executing him, though it appeared to them that they were doing so. Now, your citation of Surah 50, verse 43 is interesting because there it says that God is the one who gives life and causes a death. And we should add that, yes, but to say that God caused the death of Jesus in this way might be stretching that a little too far, because think about the situation here is that the non-believers are trying to kill the messenger of God, and God is rescuing him. So it is more appropriate that God rescues him alive and not causes him to die on this occasion. Now, you mentioned Surah 3, verse 157, but the verb there is, tuhsharun. It is to God that you will be gathered. Ila Allahi tuhsharun. I'm just looking at the Arabic text there. So this hashr refers to Yawm al-Hashr, the day of gathering. That's when people will be gathered back to God. So this is not necessarily referring to Jesus being gathered to God at the time when God took him. So in the end, we can say that Rudolf, although your exegesis has been very profound, I don't believe that anything you said there detracts from the view that I've put forward, that the Quran is saying that they didn't kill him by some ordinary means, nor did they kill him by means of crucifixion. And this could imply that, or is compatible with the view that Jesus was taken down from the cross alive. Coming now to Samuel's points, many of the points that I've mentioned actually will be applied here as well. It seems that Samuel and Rudolph, you have shared notes and you are on the same page with many things here. And much of what I said in response to Rudolph applies to Samuel as well. So that's good. It's good to see teamwork of this nature. So as for sleep being considered a minor death, Samuel, you recognize then that at least two verses of the Quran, Surah 6, verse 60 and Surah 39, verse number 42, use the term tawaffa in the sense of taking in sleep, and so I was surprised by your conclusion in saying that there is no verse which uses tawaffa in the sense of taking in sleep. At least there are two verses, and that shows that this is one of the possible meanings, and so this must be considered. So to me, tying this all together, God took Jesus in sleep. And to the world, that would appear that Jesus died, because a person who lived some 2,000 years ago and is no longer here must be presumed to have died from a historical point of view. But he was probably taken in sleep. And so God rescued him from his enemies so that they did not succeed in killing him. And probably from the tomb, he was directly raised up into heaven. As for the scholars and even Bukhari cites Ibn Abbas as saying Mutawafika means mumituk, which means we cause you to die. So many Muslim scholars said that Jesus died, but not so much that he died, but that the meaning of the verse is that we cause you to die. But they add that what is happening here is what they call taqdim wa ta'khir. Not that I agree with that, but they're saying that though the verb can mean that God causes you to die, and they're taking it in that sense, but they're saying that this will happen when Jesus returns. So even though it is mentioned first, it is meant to occur second. So God is going to raise Jesus first and then send him back. And at that time, he is going to pass away. I'm not saying that I agree with that interpretation, but those who said that God causes Jesus to die often took it in that sense. And we must be aware of that, and so that we do not misrepresent what they're saying. But Assad may have had the view that Jesus already passed away, and some modern scholars do have that particular view. And so Muhammad Ali, cited in this vein, I'm sure you know that he follows a particular sect of the Islamic faith, and so he's not such a reliable representative on this particular issue, though his translation has many excellent features about it, and is studied by Sunni scholars for that reason as well. Now, to conclude then, whether we're looking at Syed Reynolds or we are looking at Cyril Glass, they're saying that, okay, Jesus died as a martyr, and the Quran is not denying the biblical narrative that Jesus died and even was possibly raised from the dead and so on. I think the better explanation, as I've explained, is that the Quran is saying that they did not succeed in crucifying him. Which would mean that they did not kill him by that particular means. And since, as Yusuf explained, Jesus was on the cross only for a few hours, to the extent that Pilate marveled that Jesus could have died so soon, then it is very possible that Jesus was taken down alive. And to me, this is the historical background that informs the Quranic statement. That is what the Quran is referring to, that those who thought they had killed Jesus are actually in doubt about the matter, and they have no definite knowledge concerning it. They only presume, they're following a supposition. It seemed to them that they had killed Jesus, but Jesus appeared to have died. And this is how it seemed to them that they had killed Jesus. But when Jesus was taken down and placed in the tomb, he could have been taken up from the tomb. Now, according to some Christian scholars nowadays, an earlier belief than is represented in the Gospels, an earlier belief of Christians, especially like in the pre-Markan Passion narrative, would have it that Jesus was translated from the tomb directly into heaven. This is found, for example, in Reginald Fuller's The Formation of the Resurrection Narratives. And also, I can rely on here Daniel Smith's book, the Postmortem Vindication of Jesus in the Sayings Gospel Q, especially in his citation of Dieter Zeller, the German scholar, who said that the Q gospel would have it that Jesus was possibly taken up alive, as is evident from the a statement about Jonah being taken up, being alive and preserved by God. So thank you all very much. It's been exciting, and I look forward to listening to you gentlemen some more.
Thanks, Shabir. Thank you for your rebuttal. We'll move straight into Samuel's rebuttal of 10 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Shabir and Yusuf, for your presentations. I will try to engage with it, and thank you to my brother Rudolf for his contribution. I want to commend Shabir for the way that he has shown that he's prepared to engage with the Quran as he sees is an authentic engagement, trying to read it carefully, and that you've come to the conclusion of saying that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that he was crucified, but that he didn't die on the cross, and that he's, he dies later on, and whatever however you felt that continued through to the return of Jesus. So I want to commend you for that, and I want to say that I agree with you about the 5 principles of interpreting the Quran, and that's what I've tried to do here. Obviously, in 20 minutes we give a very brief one, but I agree with you that we want to look at those. And I want to point out that yes, it is the case that we don't have a hadith attributed to Muhammad speaking on this, and I also want to agree with you that you raised the question of the early Muslims and how they were seeking to understand it. Were they being influenced by Jews and Christians, and how that leads to certain hadiths being invented, which become interpretive hadiths, because the hadiths which have Jesus being having a substitute on the cross, as I said, none of them are in the Sahih collections, and these hadiths vary as to who the substitute was, what the reason was, and you know, as you pointed out, that these are not genuine hadiths with all this amount of variation. I guess I just want to restate some of my points. I think that my point, and interact with what you either said or didn't say on it, I think that my point in Surah 4:157, where it says that it appeared to them, I think that that's important, because the context there is the unbelieving Jews, the unbelievers, and it appeared to them that they killed and crucified Jesus. And as I pointed out in my presentation, it's not saying that it appeared that way to everyone. And as Rudolph pointed out, in Surah 8, when Muhammad's soldiers had killed some of Muhammad's enemies, they were boasting about having killed people, and they're told, you didn't kill them. And so it appeared one way to people, that there's that reality of, you know, you may well take someone's life, but it's ultimately God who takes people's lives. And anyway, I see that this is what's happening here when it's saying that it appeared to the unbelievers whose minds are not informed by the Quran. It appeared to them that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they didn't. Just a few words on the word tawafa. I thought I did acknowledge that it can also be used for sleep. As I pointed out, there are 22 other references to this word tawafa, which is the word used in Surah 3:55 and 5:117, both of which are talking about the crucifixion. And I acknowledge that the word on 2 occasions means sleep, but in that case, it's because Islam has a different concept of sleep. And I don't think people realize this. You know, we often can read into an ancient text our own meanings of words, but in the Quran, when you go to sleep, you lose your soul. Now, I don't know how many people know that, but that's what those verses say. And so in Islamic theology, it's spoken of as the little death. And so it's just a different way of thinking about sleep, that you're dead in a sense. And so while the word tawafa is used in sleep, what it says about sleep is that Allah's taking your soul. And so I think my points still stand, that on all the references I gave, tawafa means, and it's only used for the taking of the soul, the taking of the soul. And if in the morning, when it's referring to sleep, Allah gives you your soul back, then you continue to live. If not, and if he keeps your soul, you stay dead. And that seems to be how the Quran's using it. But for the other 20 times, it means taken in death. And so I can't see what Surah 3:55 and 117 mean, apart from Allah, he was the one who mercifully took Jesus' life rather than letting other people take his life. And so that's what's happening on the cross. They didn't kill or crucify Jesus in the sense that God was the one who took Jesus' life, though it did appear to them that they were doing it, but that's because they're unbelievers. I want to look at the reference. I think you were talking about Surah 3, verse 169, I believe it was, where you were talking about the martyr and their soul being gathered up, and you're saying that's the gathering on the last day. But I'm fairly sure that in Islamic theology, and certainly in the hadiths explaining it by Muhammad, the soul of the martyr is taken directly to paradise, and they don't go to the grave. So I think when Surah 3, 169 and 2, 154 are talking about martyrs and them being with God, I think it means that they're going straight to God, that they're being taken directly up. That's certainly what the hadiths attributed to Muhammad say. And so, that's what I think it means. And I think it means that they don't go into the grave first. The martyrs go directly to paradise. The others go into the grave. And then from the grave, they may make it into paradise later on. I want to pick up a few points from Yusuf. You're talking about, you spend a lot of time talking about what the Bible says about it. Just a couple of things there. You're talking about Jesus, that Christians are all in doubt about what happened on the crucifixion. We're not in doubt. We're not in doubt at all. We're not the ones in doubt. So, for instance, the example you gave of what day was Jesus crucified, you said in John he's crucified on the day of preparation. You've actually got that mixed up. It's the day of preparation for the Sabbath. It's not the day of preparation for the Passover. The Passover is a week-long celebration, and so you've got a whole week to get ready. But on the Friday when Jesus was crucified, that's the day of preparation, not for the Passover, but for the Sabbath. And if you read John, I believe it's chapter 19, you'll actually see it specifically said to be the preparation for the Sabbath. So all the Gospels say he was crucified on the same day. They also say that Jesus died. All of them will say that Jesus gave up his spirit. He breathed his last. John's Gospel will talk about Jesus being speared by the soldiers. And so they're quite clear that he did die. Now, regarding Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7, and saying that Hebrews in some ways confirms that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Well, Hebrews 5:7 does not say that Jesus didn't die. It says that God heard Jesus' prayer. But when we read the Gospels, we see Jesus wrestling with the path that God had put before him. And yes, his prayer was heard, but that was the path he had to walk. And I mean, that's the same with actually us in our lives. God may have a path for us to walk that we may ask God to take from us, but he doesn't. Now, is our prayer heard? Yes. And when you read the rest of Hebrews 2, verse 9, 6, verse 6, 9:15, and 13:20, they all explicitly say that Jesus died. Now, regarding Jesus' return, I want to come back to that because I don't think there are any grounds in the Quran for believing that Jesus is coming back. And I've heard other Islamic scholars say this as well. So this is not just an unorthodox view. There's orthodox Muslims who would just say, no, we don't see that in the Quran. And so the question really comes up, are we going to interpret the Quran and let it speak for itself? Or are we going to say the Hadith has to shape what we're going to read in the Quran? Now, you may want to do that with the Hadith, and maybe you need some context from the Hadith. But I want to say, if the Quran speaks clearly enough on a subject, we should just take that as it is. And if a Hadith doesn't agree with that, we shouldn't accept the Hadith. We shouldn't go the other way. I'll finish up there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Samuel. We're going to move into the rebuttals of Yusuf and Rudolph, which will be 7 minutes each. So, Yusuf, over to yourself for your 7 minutes. And Yusuf, you're on mute at the moment.
Can you hear me now? Okay, that's good. Well, thank you, Samuel, and thank you, Dr. Shabir, for that. I really enjoyed this discussion. Firstly, Samuel states that this verse does not speak, the verse 4157 is not a denial of a crucifixion. And he says 2 reasons that it is not the case. One, it does not say that Jesus did not die. Well, of course, it doesn't say that in a general sense he did not die, but it denies the fact that he was killed in the ordinary sense, and denies the fact that he was crucified, death by crucifixion. So what is it saying? When the Quran says they are saying they killed him, and the Quran is saying, or they crucified him, and the Quran is saying, well, they killed him not. Well, then the response is, well, then they killed him by crucifixion. The Quran says they didn't even do that. So it's وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. They killed him not, nor did they kill him by means of crucifixion. So how can you say the verse is not a denial of the crucifixion? If somebody's saying, well, they killed Samuel or they killed Yusuf, and I'm saying they didn't kill him, means that he's presumably alive. They didn't kill him. Now, if he dies later, naturally, a point can be made. But in this particular instance, there is a categorical denial of the crucifixion. You then ask about the question, what does Shabir Ali mean? And if you look at, for example, the Lisan al-Arab, they tell us that Shabir Ali may bear two interpretations. One, that he was made to be like it, to resemble, or that the matter was made dubious or obscure. The Ruh al-Ma'ani states that the meaning may be that the matter became dubious to them. So in a manner of speaking, what the Quran is saying is that it appears to them that he died or they killed him. And it appears to them that they succeeded in killing him by crucifixion. And what the Quran is saying, it is negativing the act of death by crucifixion. It is saying they didn't kill him. They didn't kill him by crucifixion. But it purportedly appeared to be that he died by crucifixion. And when you take that approach and you juxtapose it with the biblical narratives and the doubts and the contradictory reports and accounts, you can see why that basically makes sense on that particular issue. So what the Quran is doing is that it is negativing the act of death by crucifixion as a corrective measure of Christian belief on the issue. Because the Christian belief is not that salvation lies by just simply Jesus being put on the cross. The Christian belief is that Jesus died by crucifixion, as a result of which through his blood we attain his salvation. And the Quran is taking a corrective issue on that specific belief by saying they didn't kill him in the ordinary sense. They didn't kill him either by means of crucifixion. Whether he died or not subsequently is a secondary issue, and arguments can be made for or against. But the point is, in this instance, it is a categorical denial. You then raise Surah 3, verse 55, which is saying, in other words, God will tell Jesus in Surah 3, verse 55, I will take you. If I could open up to Surah 3, verse 55, I will cause you or take you, or as you want to translate, cause you to die and exalt you. Again, Surah 3, verse 55 is not mentioned next to Surah 4, verse 157. It's mentioned separately. And at best, what you can do, Samuel, is that argument can be made at best for a subsequent natural death. It is not saying now that you can't juxtapose Surah 3, verse 55 with Surah 4, 157 and then make the argument that, look, God killed him. But the point being made, it is not now confirming the crucifixion or death by crucifixion, which is categorically denied in Surah 4, verse 157. And the other point is this, is that as you've acknowledged quite clearly, that the Quran says, Allah yatawaffa al-anfusa hina mawtiha wallati lam tamut fi manamiha fayumsiku allati qada alayha al-mawta. That it is Allah that takes the souls of men at death. Some would argue symbolic, and those that die not, he takes during their sleep, those on whom he has passed a decree. Some would argue as symbolic, but what the word that is used there is wafa. Wafa, it is Allah who takes away the souls, wafa, at the time of their death, and those that die not during their sleep, in a symbolic sense. And in that instance, if you take into account that it has a multiplicity of meanings, it's not surprising why a lot of the commentators translate it as take, as opposed to causing you to die. You mentioned there's no mention of the second coming of Jesus in the Quran, but you know, many people have pointed out وَإِنَّهُ لَعِلْمُ لِسَاعَةُ فَلَا تَمْتَرُونَ بِهَا وَاتَّبِعُونَ هَذَا صِرَاطٌ مُسْتَقِيمٌ. Almost the majority of translators translate this as Jesus, referring to a particular proper noun. Jesus will be a sign of knowledge of the hour. Now, Jesus shall be a sign. In parenthesis, Jesus shall be a sign for the coming of the hour. And they argue that on this basis, this is in reference to the second coming. Now, if you want to make the argument, well, it's not a reference to the second coming. Again, it does not in any way vindicate the position that Jesus was killed by crucifixion. It just simply confirms that he's not coming back, that he died in the course of events, that he died a natural death. And so not surprisingly, you, for example, find Maulana Muhammad Ali in Surah 5, verse 177, on 117, those who state that it refers to, I will cause you to die, refers to actual death. They say that that verse is a conclusive proof that Jesus died a natural death. And yet Jesus says that so long as he was amongst his followers, he was a witness of their condition. And the logical conclusion of that statement is that the doctrine of the divinity was introduced in the Christian faith after his death, after thou didst cause me to die. So in effect, all you can do, Samuel, is you can make an argument for his natural death. but not for the fact that he's crucified or that he died by means of crucifixion. Rudolph alluded to Surah 8, verse 117, where essentially, I think it speaks about the fact that, if I could just turn to it, Nano, that God did not kill. It's not you did not kill, but it's God who slew. And that basically refers to the fact that God, in other words, assists you. He slays the enemy for you, but it doesn't mean that you do not physically do that. Now, the point being made, Jesus was not killed in God's cause. According to even the existing Jewish theology of the time, he was killed as a blasphemer. In Deuteronomy 21, verse 23, he that is crucified is accursed of God. And essentially, he was killed as a blasphemer. God's truly anointed one cannot be killed. So the Quran is attacking a theological position. And lastly, the point raised by Samuel about Hebrews, where it's inferring that the path that Jesus was wrestling with. But essentially what you are then saying, Samuel, is that Jesus was not a willing sacrifice. God wanted one thing and Jesus wanted something else. And Jesus was not a willing sacrifice to start off with. But we are told that he's God Almighty, or God incarnate. And if he's not a willing sacrifice, then, Shabir pointed out that this, as blasphemous as it may sound, would amount to some sort of, cosmic child abuse in a manner of speaking. So this, in a nutshell, is the problem that I have with the position that I take. But once again, I commend both you gentlemen for doing a fine job in attempting to exegete these Quranic passages and giving your spin on that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yusuf. Thanks for your rebuttal. We're going to move straight into Rudolph's rebuttal of 7 minutes. Thanks, Rudolph.
7 minutes and 16 seconds, because you gave Joseph 16 seconds. Now I'm just nitpicking.
That's fine. I don't have. Thank you.
I know you don't. I know. I enjoy this conversation because obviously I want to learn from this as well. But let me just start and say that, when I heard the topic, what does the Quran say? I'm not demeaning the secondary sources, neither any other method or means to interpret the Quran. I was just expectant of the fact that we're going to champion the Quran and see what the Quran is saying. But that's just me. I'm just coming from that very perspective. Samuel has pretty much addressed a lot of the points that I would like to have spoken about, and I ticked it off as he said it, and I was like, oh no, I've got nothing to say. So I'm just going to try to say something in the 7 minutes that can maybe bear a little bit more value to the conversation. Something that I always see coming out whenever we have this discussion is the very fact that there is a demeaning of what the biblical context says overall. And maybe if I can restate, for instance, when we look at the biblical passages in Scripture where Yusuf spoke about the fact that in Hebrews, Samuel said that in Hebrews chapter 2, we can see Yusuf mentioned chapter 5, Jesus would be, he would be saved. I think the context of Hebrews shows quite clearly that in chapter 9, 10 as well, that there was a death of Christ and that death bore a meaning to what Christians would then deem to be when it looks at the substitutionary atonement of the work of Christ. I think that is very important. But scriptures like John 19:34, for instance, that stipulates quite clearly that Jesus died. And when they came to see Jesus in John 19:33, the biblical authors, and I'm not going to look at the merit of the text, but says quite clearly that, when they came to Jesus, he was already dead. Now, let's remind ourselves that these individuals that were executing people on crosses were not in the business of allowing somebody to simply swoon. And that's why in Mark 15:44 and 45, when Pilate asks whether he was executed and whether he was dead, that he was surprised, not because Jesus was not dead, but because we can see quite clearly that the overall context stipulate that there must have been something that have taken place that affirms the death of Jesus Christ. Another point that we also should consider when we look at the scriptural context is that prior to the crucifixion, Jesus was severely flogged. He was weakened by the ordeal where Simon of Cyrene had to carry the cross for him. We can go into the internal evidences of Jesus hanging physically on the cross. If he could survive that by himself, his respiratory function on the cross, if he basically could potentially survive that and simply swoon, all of these things tell us that there is definitely a evidence for the understanding of the death of Christ. And it's interesting that when we look at Dr. Bart Ehrman, he even is of the opinion that the traditions are quite emphatic that Jesus was executed and he was killed. Just one example. And the interesting thing is that when we look at the rest of the scriptures, when we look at the other books that have been written in the New Testament, for instance, Peter speaks in 1 Peter chapter 2:24. He speaks of the fact that Jesus died for our sins. Like I said, if we look at 1 Corinthians 15:3-5, we can see also quite clearly that in the earliest days of Christianity, there was simply no doubt as to what the outcome would be concerning the person of Jesus Christ, his work, and also his death. And then Yusuf mentioned that, well, Tacitus and Josephus and all of these authors, some of what they've written is in doubt. But I would suggest that there are other authors as well that's a little bit earlier. If you look at Ignatius, if you look at Clement of Rome, if you look at some of these early church fathers, Justin Martyr, all of these affirm quite clearly and quite abrasively that Jesus died by death and by crucifixion. And therefore, I just want to champion that reality once more, that is the biblical imperative. For Christians, that is all we see, that's all we read, that's what we see predicted in Jesus when he walks the face of the earth, when he announces he's at the pinnacle point of his ministry that he will die on a cross. Some of his disciples even have a conversation with him surrounding that. But that is the point. But what is envisioned today is not what the biblical text is saying. But we are asking, what is the Qur'an saying? And I'm saying that when I read Surah 4, 157, 158, when I see what is described in chapter 355 and 5:117, we can see that these verses are not explicitly saying that Jesus, did not die explicitly. They are basically speaking to a specific audience. When it speaks about the Jews the unbelieving Jews did not kill him, we know that. We know from the biblical imperative it was the Romans that killed him. So it is not that we can describe something different when we come to a conclusion, when we see the overall explanation of the Quranic text, but we can simply affirm that which is biblically rendered. And we can see quite clearly that when the Quranic context speaks, it speaks emphatically about what I've explained in my opening statement. The Quran speaks quite emphatically. And I think, Yusuf, I've mentioned Surah Al-Anfal in chapter 8:17, where it speaks of, you did not kill them, but Allah killed them. It's interesting that Sayyid Nasr Hussain in his study Quran speaks, and he says from another perspective, that verse is understood to mean that, it is in Allah's relationship to creation, only him that bears the authority to take life from humanity. So I think that was the point I was trying to make from Surah Al-Af, that's chapter 50:43. Again, when I look at the context of the Quran, the best way to explain these verses is to say, well, the Quran is not essentially denying what we've depicted to be true. When we look at the crucifixion of Christ, it is rather speaking directly from Allah's perspective, in the fact that he can see what we cannot, and therefore we have no knowledge, but there's a revealed knowledge in the Quran because he is the knower of the unseen, according to Al-Rad. That's chapter 13 of the Quran, ayat 9. And so proper knowledge is attributed to us because God is telling us that, the reality of the crucifixion of Jesus is something which is assumed to be stipulated in the Quran, yet it is affirmed in the fact that he is not dead, according to Al-Imran chapter 3, 169 and 3, 157-58. But he is alive. He's not death after dead, or after his death on the cross. He was raised up to God. And so for Christians, we do not have any problem to look at these verses and say that the context of the Quran is describing a reality which explains the context of the Quran better for me. I don't have to go to Al-Razi. I love Al-Razi, read him, it's great. See his commentary about Jesus swinging on the cross. That is great. But what is the Quran saying? What is the Quran interpreting about the Quran? And I'll be honest, if I look at that context of the Quran, I can honestly say that is what I think the Quran is saying. I think it's a better explanation. And I'm excited.
You're coming out of time, so I think we're going to have to move on.
16 seconds.
Yeah, no, you went a little bit over those extra 16, but I think I'm going to have
Give him
to,
another 16. I don't
yeah,
know.
I think a few
It's
extra.
interesting listening to Rudolph.
No. I just wanted to say that I can say it in 5 seconds.
Yeah, sure.
I think this discussion is actually adding value to what Dr. Shabir is saying and Yusuf is saying. We are not trying to detract from it. And I think if you read the Quran, it is really saying what we are trying to say.
That's a great segue into the time of cross-examination. So just a reminder of how things will work. So we'll have 10 minutes each way. So 20 minutes in total. The first 10 minutes, Shabir and Yusuf will be asking Samuel and Rudolph any questions that they would like answers to. And then, of course, we'll go vice versa for the next 10. So I'm going to hand over to Shabir and Yusuf to then spend the next 10 minutes asking Samuel and Rudolph any particular questions they have.
Yusuf, you want to start?
I'll let you start. I started the last time, Dr. Shabir, and then I can follow through.
Okay, then. All right. Let me just set my own timer here so we can keep track of what's happening.
I can join in after you ask. That's fine. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. All right. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your very informative contributions. I noticed that there was some difference between Samuel and Rudolph in your response to my 5 principles. Samuel said he agrees with the 5 principles, and Rudolph, you seem to be suggesting that my 5 principles, at least 4 of them, would be a departure from the topic at hand, which is what does the Quran say? So you're not disputing the first principle that the Quran should be interpreted in the light of the Quran, and of course you've done an excellent job in trying to connect verse with a verse. But if you look at my 5 principles, principle number 2, interpreting in the light of the hadith, and I've said there's no hadith on the question, and principle number 3, that we interpret in the light of what the earliest community said, and I've actually discounted that because we did not find any credible information from the earliest community, at least in my presentation. So that leaves the Arabic grammar and the history. And I don't think that in your attempts to interpret the Quran by means of the Quran, you intend to ignore the historical background to know what the Quran is talking about, and that you intend to ignore the Arabic language, which is so endemic to the interpretation of the Quran. So please, can you gentlemen shed light on that point?
Okay, I can begin, Rudolph. That's okay. I don't think Rudolph and I were disagreeing with your 5 points. And I mean, as you pointed out, there is no hadith from Muhammad. The hadiths that we have are seen to be unreliable and not in the Sahih collections. And so we agree with you at those points. I guess for both of us, we feel that what is in the Quran is enough, and that there is a place for looking at the hadiths, or obviously we're reading according to the grammar. I mean, I did my preparation in the Arabic, and I've tried to do everything according to Arabic, and so I'm not seeking to be ignorant of those things. I'm not just relying on translations, and I just think that for both of us, we think that the information that's in the Quran and how it describes itself and how it explains itself is enough in this case. Rudolph, did you want to add anything there?
I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think, Dr. Shabir, what we're saying, we're not discounting the secondary, third, and fourth elements that you've mentioned. What we are trying to state is that what the Quran speaks about should be deemed to be clear, and that should be deemed to be sufficient according to the promise of the Quran itself. And therefore, we would like to see what the Quran says in and by itself. We're not trying to dispute the secondary sources. But I think what confuses me sometimes, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to take too long, but we've seen a classic example where Yusuf now means, and he speaks about the secondary sources for Christian sources. For instance, he looks at Tacitus, Josephus, etc., and he calls them to a form of dispute. They are disputed because they're late. They are disputed because their is historically there's deemed to be changes and so forth and so forth. We can do exactly the same when it comes to the elements which is found in the Hadith. And that's why I think, from my side, I left the Hadith specifically for today. Some of it is written late. We do not have any emphatic statements by the Prophet that speaks of the crucifixion, and therefore I almost want to say, I'm not disregarding it, but for the sake of this conversation, as we said, what does the Quran say about the crucifixion? I'm going to stick with the Quran. And when I read the Quran, it is emphatically made clear that the Quran is saying something a lot more explanatory in scope than what I found convincing in your presentations. And that, I'm just being honest. If I read the Quran, that's what I see the Quran is highlighting. And I think that's what we are trying to say. But we're not trying to demean or dispute the other sources, as Dr. Ali has said. That's why in my opening statement I started and I said that when I learn from Muslim scholars how to interpret the Quran and what I need to speak about, when I look at the Quran is the highest tafsir. It's the best way to explain the Quran. And I want to do so. And when I do, here is the conclusion. So it's something, like I said, that is in no way hostile. It's something that I would like for our adherents and our debate opponents to consider, because that is what the Quran is saying. That is all. There's no hostility intended in that, Dr. Ali.
Yes. So, Rudolf and Samuel, while I did mention the 5 principles for the sake of completion and for completeness, and I showed how the 5 principles would apply to our interpretation of the verse, you must have noticed that what it comes down to in the end is that my statement that the Quranic word salb means to kill by means of crucifixion, that actually comes from another verse of the Quran, Surah 5, verse number 33, as both Yusuf and I have explained. So do you feel that there is something in our presentation that depended on the other sources of Quranic exegesis rather than the Quran itself on this particular point?
I see what you're saying there, although I wasn't sure that Yusuf agreed with you on your understanding of crucifixion, and that crucifixion may just be itself a form of punishment and not a form of death, because that's what you're saying.
I just want to clarify that point. And basically, I do agree in principle that the word salabuhu has 2 meanings. One, the act of crucifying place on the cross, and the other one, the act of basically being killed by means of crucifixion. And the point I was saying that in relation to 4 verse 157, it's negativing the normal act of execution and the act of being killed by being crucified. That's the point. So I'm in agreement with Dr. Shabir on that point. And I think the question he's asking is that in light of the fact that you mentioned secondary sources, there was nothing in our presentation which relied on secondary sources. In fact, I was taking into account what the Quran says and looking at the historical position. By the way, I don't want to disrupt, but why I raise Tacitus and Josephus is because the attack is made generally that the Quran is ahistorical 600 years later, and we've got historical source documents, non-Christian like Josephus and Tacitus, which affirms the crucifixion. And that's why I attack the authenticity on that ground. So I just want to clarify that particular position. But coming back to Dr. Shabir's question, there was nothing in our presentation that went outside the source of the Quran.
Yep.
Despite the fact that I appreciate your position that you are taking a concordist approach and you are attempting to reconcile the crucifixion narrative with the Quranic point of view, that possibly it's not denying the crucifixion in one sense, which we are disputing, of course.
Yes. So, I mean, to answer Shabir's question, you were saying, did we have a problem with you saying that crucifixion, where was it? It was in Surah 7, verse 124, about the use of the word crucifixion there. I'd say that that's fine. I'm happy for you to do that, but I felt that that doesn't really deal with Surah 3:55 and 5:117. And so I think we're having a good discussion in that we were trying to let the Quran interpret itself, but I just felt that I was gathering together all the references to the crucifixion. We can look at this later on. Whereas you weren't looking at all of those references about the crucifixion, rather just the word itself. So, yeah.
But Samuel, can I come in? And I don't want to be rude to
No,
Dr.
no.
Shabir, because Surah 4 verse 157, Surah 3 verse 55, and Surah 5 verse 117 do not appear side by side. And the point that I'm asking, and I do understand, I appreciate your concordance approach. You're not taking a conflicting approach. You're trying to reconcile what the Quran says with possible Christian belief. Do you accept this principle when the Quran says, "Shubbiha lahum," it appeared to be so? What is your basis for rejecting the fact that we believe what the Quran is saying, that "Shubbiha lahum" means it appeared to them that he died, and it appeared to them that they succeeded in killing him, but the Quran is saying it just simply appeared to them? That is what the "Shubbiha lahum" means. So do you accept that as a principle, that in reference to 4:157?
Absolutely, I accept it, but I'm saying in context, it's referring to the unbelieving Jews. It's not talking about the disciples.
But now, fine, that's fine. But then, how do you then come to a conclusion that 5:117 and 3:55 deals with crucifixion, or him dying by crucifixion? Because most of the classical, even some of the modern commentators who accept that it refers to the death of Christ, infer that it refers to his natural death, not death by means of crucifixion, because the Quran takes a corrective approach on that specific issue. But where they say that it refers to, let's assume 3:55, I will cause you to die, or I will take you, or 5:117, it refers to a natural death. Those who accept that it means dying, not that it means that he died by means of crucifixion. So what's your exegetical basis or model for you to suggest that 3:55 has to be read for 1:57?
Absolutely, because 3:55 and 5:117 are talking about Jesus being taken up, and that happened in the crucifixion event. So I'm not like I agree with you that they didn't kill him or crucify him in the sense of that's how it appeared to them, but I am saying that God took his soul, or something like that happened, because the context of 3:55 and 5:117 is when Jesus is taken, which is the crucifixion event. But I think
but I'm not confused there, Samuel. Do you agree that the Quran is denying that they killed Jesus by means of crucifixion? Do you accept that?
Well,
in light of the word salabu and its usage in the Quran, do you accept the fact that the Quran is denying that they killed him by means of crucifixion?
Well, no, because salabu lahum doesn't mean that they, like that. That's just saying that it appeared to them that they did these things.
Yes, but they didn't. But they didn't. The point being made, the Quran is saying they didn't. It only appeared to them that they succeeded in killing him by means of crucifixion.
Yes, and so the question is, what does it mean that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, and they didn't? Because the Quran doesn't say he died. It says they didn't kill him, and it even doesn't say they didn't kill him. It says it appeared to them that they killed and crucified him. And what I'm saying is you have to explain what that what it appeared.
So I want to leave Dr. Shabir to this, but if it means that it appeared to them that they succeeded in killing him, or it appeared to them that they succeeded in crucifying him by killing him, but they didn't do that, it simply means what it says. Dr. Shabir, your comment?
Yeah, the only thing to be aware of is that our 10 minutes have been used up, and so I'll leave it to Dave to direct us on how to proceed.
And I was going to bring that up again, so we may be able to continue that, but we do need to wrap it up before it goes too long. That's all.
Great. So we'll move into the second part of the cross-examination, which of course is then Samuel and Rudolph having an opportunity to then ask their questions to Shabir and Yusuf, and we'll be true to the time as well, and go a little bit over. So I think 12 minutes maximum. So over to Samuel and Rudolph.
Okay. Rudolph, would you like to start? Because I've been talking.
Yes, I would love to ask both Yusuf and Dr. Shabir a direct question. I know Dr. Shabir in the past have actually affirmed the crucifixion. So in other words, Jesus was placed on the cross. Today we heard his position again. Both of you, can you emphatically state the position that you can accept the fact that Jesus was crucified, irrespective if he survived or not, that he was placed on a cross and he was crucified? Just That's my starting.
So Yusuf had spoken to that. So let me put it in my own words then. And so crucifixion can have two meanings, and we should not conflate the two meanings. One meaning is that the person is placed on a cross, regardless whether this is a live body, a dead body, before killing, as a means of killing, just simply placing the person on the cross. So when Mark's gospel says it was the third hour when they crucified him, Mark simply means that's the time they put him up on the cross. But when Christians say Jesus was crucified for our transgressions, they mean that he died on the cross. They mean he was killed by means of crucifixion. So we can see that there are two meanings here of crucifixion: merely hanging on a cross, or dying by means of hanging on the cross. So the question then is, which meaning does the Quran have in mind here in saying ma salabuhu, they did not crucify him? Is the Quran denying that he was even put on the cross, meaning one, or is the Quran denying that they killed him by means of crucifixion, which is meaning two? So we are allowing for meaning one, that the Quran, we're saying the Quran is not denying that Jesus was put on the cross, but the Quran is denying meaning two. The Quran is denying that they killed him by means of crucifixion. So if Jesus was taken down from the cross alive, then that satisfies the Quranic denial.
Yeah, just on I'll be quick on that point. If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, Rudolph, it defines crucifixion as the act of killing someone by nailing his or her feet and hands to a cross, capitalized the crucifying of Jesus Christ on a cross, meaning death by crucifixion. So the Quran, in a manner of speaking, is not playing around with semantics or words. What does crucify mean? Can it mean just being put up on the cross, or dying on a cross? It is negativing the actual theological belief of Christianity, which is the act of killing someone by nailing his or her feet and hands to a cross. If you recall, some years back, Didat had this book called Crucifixion or Crucifixion, because of the term and the terminology and the controversy it created. But the Quran is specific on this particular issue. It's dealing with a theological point. It doesn't go into this whole pedantic element of saying, well, if you're on the cross, can you be viewed as crucified or not? It's dealing specifically with an act of an individual, in this case Jesus, being killed by being put on the cross. That's a definition of salabuhu in this context, and the Quran is saying that never happened. And in all the passages of the Quran where the word salabuhu is used, even in instance of Surah 20, Surah Taha, with the instance of Fir'aun, where Pharaoh says he will call, get them crucified, that's a punishment that is being used. It's used in the context of execution. So in other words, being put on the cross, just simply not for humiliation purposes, but being put on the cross for purposes of being killed. And that is, if we want to talk about not going to outside sources and just sticking to the Quran, which is what I commend you gentlemen for doing, then from the Quranic point of view, the word salabuhu means being killed on a cross. And the Quran is saying they didn't kill him in that fashion, but shubbiha lahum, but it appeared to be so. It appeared that he died by crucifixion. It appeared.
Thanks so much, Yusuf. Thank you. Yusuf, I don't want to interrupt you, but that is exactly what I wanted to ask, just as a follow-up question. Dr. Ali mentioned Surah 7:124, 220, 277, 533. And for me, when I read that, or when I listened to the presentation, when you guys brought it together, it seems like the crucifixion and what was spoken of Pharaoh, the execution seemed to indicate a sure death, not an escape. Now, how do you apply that to Jesus? And then you say, no, but he escaped death, but in this instance, it's interpreted differently. There seems to be a disparity in the interpretation of those two concepts, especially when you look at the different texts. So thanks for answering that. I've got another question, but I know Samuel also wants to ask questions, so I'm going to leave it to him.
I just had a quick one. Yusuf, several times in your presentation and rebuttals, you were saying that it's referring to Christians who, that Surah 4:157 is referring to Christians who are in doubt about those things, but there's nothing in the context to just say that it's referring to Christians. The charge, as we had from the reading that we had at the beginning, it's all about Jews and their unbelief. So how do you get the idea that Christians are in doubt at all from the Quran, from those verses? Where does it say Christians are in doubt?
No, it doesn't say in that particular passage that Christians are in doubt, but it's dealing with a theological problem existing within Christianity. Now, when it says those who differ therein are in doubt by it, that doubt is manifest and in fact is apparent in the New Testament. And the passages that I essentially gave, for example, whereby the time factor is coming into consideration, whereby, for example, the Pharisees come to Pilate and ask Pilate to make the sepulchre be sure until the third day, lest his disciples come and steal him and say he's risen from the dead. The last error shall be worse than the first. It's quite clear that there was not a conclusive belief there amongst the Jews at that time that they were successful in relation to their crucifixion. The first error, if you look at Matthew 27:64, was that possibly Jesus had been taken off much earlier than was necessary. His bones were not broken, therefore he would not be killed by crucifixion. And so their concern, if their concern came to fruition, they attempted to come to Pilate to say, make the sepulchre secure. So if he didn't die by means of crucifixion, then he would die by means of being suffocated in relation to being put in the particular tomb. So that's a particular doubt that you see. There's a doubt of Pilate. There's a doubt and surprise where he questions the centurion, who also expresses doubt and Pilate asks him in order to silence a doubt of his contemporaries. But more specifically, what is a greater doubt is that I made the earlier point that nowhere in the Gospels do you have a single positive eyewitness statement that Jesus in fact died on the cross, that he was dead, and when they removed him from the cross or placed in the tomb, they placed a dead body. You don't have an eyewitness account. So what the gospel writers do is that they are compelled to introduce the woman, and many other women came from Jerusalem and so on. So that's the doubt that I would believe the Quran is referring to when you juxtapose the Quranic statement in 4:157 with the biblical narrative.
Okay. Well, again, as I just want to come back to, the context is it's talking to Jews, and the reference you gave in Matthew's gospel to the Jewish leaders coming to Pilate saying that the second deception will be worse than the first. The first deception was that Jesus was being considered the Messiah. And so there was no doubt that's what he was claiming to do. And what it actually says in Matthew is that his disciples will come and take the body. They're not saying that there's any doubt about him being dead. They all agree he's dead. They're saying they might come and steal the body and say he's been raised from the dead. So the issue there is about the resurrection. It's not about the death of Jesus. So you just don't have that verse correct.
Samuel, here's the problem. The problem is that the Pharisees didn't believe in miracles. They didn't admit to the divine origin. They didn't acknowledge him as a Messiah. Therefore, they couldn't attribute a belief to the people that if the body was stolen and the sepulchre was found empty, then one would believe that Jesus had risen from the dead, because as I understand, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they had no concept of a resurrection. To them, with the traditions of the Old Testament regarding raising of the dead, securing of the tomb, would have been no safeguard. So essentially, what the Pharisees and the elders knew is that through possible unforeseen circumstances, Jesus had possibly not died on the cross, hence his doubt. And they wanted to ensure his death now by sealing and securing the tomb. That's why it says that the last error, if the tomb is not secured, then the last error shall be worse than the first. What's the first mistake? The first mistake is letting him come down too quickly, not being assured that he's dead on the cross, having established that doubt, which the Quran refers to, and now telling Pilate, well, look, make sure the tomb is secure. So if he didn't die in the first instance, which we are now doubting, he would die by suffocation by means of the tomb being closed, but the tomb was already moved. So the last error shall be worse than the first. That's my understanding, because they didn't believe in the resurrection. For them, it was all false. They didn't believe that he was a Messiah in any event. So why should they be concerned that others may believe he's a Messiah when they had no conception of the resurrection of the dead? Christianity says the resurrection. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Pharisees did believe in the resurrection. It was the Sadducees who didn't.
The Sadducees, yes.
Yeah, but the Pharisees did. Like, the Pharisees did. The people you're saying didn't believe in it actually did.
Yeah, but not in a bodily resurrection. You see, they didn't believe in a bodily resurrection. And 1 Corinthians 15:42.
I tell Jews. Anyway, that's our time.
Yeah.
Thanks for that cross-examination session. And thanks for keeping to the time on that second part. We're going to move into the concluding statements. And we're going to start off with, firstly, Rudolph and Yusuf, who will have 3 minutes each. So, Rudolph, I'm going to hand over to you for your closing statement of 3 minutes. Rudolph, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
So sorry. My first time using this platform, so forgive me. I'll start from scratch. Well, when we look at my overall presentation, I just want to reaffirm once more that there is no reason to deny the crucifixion. And both the speakers, Muslim speakers today, in actual fact, can affirm the very fact that Jesus was on a cross, even though they do not affirm the death of Jesus. This makes me partially excited, but let me also say that when I read the Quranic context, there's therefore nothing that I can assume to say that Jesus did not die by crucifixion. The only thing I can see is that it mentions that the Jews boasted about the fact that they did kill Jesus by crucifixion, when in actual fact it was not them that did so. Also, the Quranic context can clearly accommodate the very tension that affirms both the death of Christ and the right of Allah to allow some to be killed. And then I also showed that the Quran tells us about the unseen realities of the crucifixion, which is then recorded by Allah, and then clearly telling us that even though Jesus was assumed to be dead, or we should say crucified, we can see quite clearly that the reality of his death is not the end of his life, because he's seen, like the martyrs of old, as it is stipulated in chapter 13, verse 9 of the Quran, that he is still alive. So we are limited by what is seen. God is not limited by what is seen. So we can see quite clearly that the crucifixion is not something that is explicitly denied, neither the death of Jesus, when we look at the Quranic context. So what I would say is that we must let the Quran speak, and what the Quran is saying happened as we see it stipulated on the cross, and we must let the Quran also interpret itself. And when I look at the way in which me and Samuel today endeavored to commonly interpret the Quran and what the Quran says about the crucifixion and the death of Jesus Christ, I think we can conclude that the Quran in and of itself can accommodate our perspectives. Also, what is very important for us is that when we look at the Quranic context, we can see quite clearly that Muslims can affirm the crucifixion and with a surety say that Jesus was definitely on the cross. Some of the questions we did not get to, though, is if someone was placed on the cross in the place of Jesus, we do not understand why there would be an objection for the substitutionary atonement of Christ. Maybe in a future discussion we can look at that. We look at the interpretive method of both Dr. Shabir and Yusuf. In past conversations, they did mention that we should always interpret the clear from the unclear, and we did agree to that. And the clear explanation from the Quran tells us quite clearly what happened to Jesus. Also, the question about Jesus, if he swooned on the cross, we can see quite clearly that there's nothing of Christ swooning that is actually exemplified or even given in the Quran itself explicitly. But when we look at the historical and the contemporary and even some of the biblical evidences that I've tried to mention, we can see quite clearly that there is no doubt that Jesus died by crucifixion. And let me end with a question. What would be more glorious from the context is that when we look at Allah raising Jesus from the dead is a lot better than explaining that he was simply saved from the cross. And that would make God most glorious, and that is what I'm going to go for. In closing, thank you so much for the conversation with Dr. Shabir. Yusuf, who is a dear friend, thank you so much. We will probably discuss these things again. But again, when I look at the context of the Quran, I find a grateful satisfaction in the way in which we laid the credentials of the Quran bare, and we will affirm what it says in it so much.
Thanks very much, Rudolph. Thanks for your concluding statement. Yusuf, we'll give you 3 and probably a half minutes because Rudolph had a little bit extra there, just to have your concluding statement. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, firstly, thank you, Rudolph. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Dr. Shabir. Rudolph says that Muslims can affirm the crucifixion. But how? How can they affirm the crucifixion? Is Christian belief that Jesus was in fact put on the cross and he survived, or he just hung there? No. The Christian understanding is that Jesus died by crucifixion. And what does the Quran say? It says, وَمَا قَتَلُهُ, they killed him not. وَمَا صَلَبُهُ, they did not kill him by means of crucifixion. So how can Muslims affirm the crucifixion? Because, you know, I wouldn't say he's being deceptive, but the point being made, it is misleading to say we can affirm the crucifixion when the Quran is disputing that. It's disputing the theological belief in death by crucifixion. The word Shabir Ali, basically what it's saying is that you will not be killed. He was not killed. You didn't die by murder, nor did you die by crucifixion. Shabir Ali specifically means, as I understanding, it is negativing the act of death in the normal sense, negativing the act of death by means of crucifixion as a corrective measure of Christian belief on that particular issue. So it appeared they killed him. It appeared they also succeeded in killing him by crucifixion. The Quran is saying it just simply appeared to them. It didn't happen. So if it didn't happen, that means he was never killed by crucifixion. And if he died in any other sense, if you look at Surah 355 or 5117, if we accept that he died, then he would at best die in the natural sense. Surah 3 verse 55 mentioned the argument can be made to a natural death in the general sense, but Allah says in other passages, Allah takes the souls of men symbolically and those who die in their sleep. The word is wafa. The other point is this, is that when you look at the issue of doubt, why doubt is raised is because Jesus remained on the cross for a very short time, a few hours, but death is always a long process in crucifixion. 2 men on the cross were still alive when Jesus was taken down. The breaking of the legs was not resorted to in relation to Jesus, but in the case of the robbers, because they had not died yet. According to Pilate, he didn't believe that Jesus died in such a short time in Mark 15:44, meaning Pilate also doubted. Here again, the doubt in the Quranic point of view. Jesus was not buried like the 2 criminals, but given to the charge of a wealthy, influential disciple of his. Mary took Jesus for his gardener. And this is the point. Why were the disciples terrified? They were not eyewitnesses. But Mary Magdalene not terrified when she came to a realization of Jesus. Why did Mary Magdalene think that Jesus was a gardener? In 1 Corinthians 15 verse 42, the word is soma pneumatikon, soma pneuma, esten soma psychikon, esten kai pneumatikon. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body, pneuma. But does that not apply to Jesus? And in Luke 24:36, when he comes to the upper room, he says, hoti pneuma, sarka kai ostia uk ekai katos emetiorete. Forgive my bad pronunciation of Greek. A spirit has no flesh and bones as you see me have. So if he says a spirit has no flesh and bones, as you see me have, what's the implications of such a statement? The implications are that he was not resurrected, that he was alive. The post-crucifixion appearances show him in hiding, show him ever in disguise, show him alive. And in a sense, can be reconciled with the Quranic point of view, which says they killed him not, nor crucified him, but it was made to appear so to them. What was it? The fact that they succeeded in killing him in the normal sense, the fact that they succeeded in killing him by means of crucifixion, and the Quran is saying they did not do either of that. And that's my particular take on this particular issue. Thank you very much, and thank you to you fine gentlemen. We hope we have the sessions like this in the future. I'm truly enjoying it.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thanks for your closing statement. We're going to move into the final closing statements by Samuel and Shabir, which will be 4 minutes each. So, Samuel, over to you for your 4-minute closing statement. Samuel, you're on mute.
Mute.
I wish to thank Shabir and Yusuf for being part of this today. I actually think that we've made progress in a whole range of ways. I've been involved in Christian-Muslim dialogue for several decades now, and I actually think that we are listening to each other and having to respond to arguments that are brought up. And I think that today has been a good example of this. If I've understood them correctly, both Yusuf and Shabir are saying that Jesus was crucified, but not unto death in the Christian understanding. And I think that is some progress. That is some progress. And so I see that as a step forward. And so I think, I want to thank you both for being part of Christian-Muslim dialogue as we can work through these issues together. I just want to give a summary of what I said. I began by looking at Surah 4:157 to 58, and I pointed out that the verses do not say Jesus did not die. Instead, they say that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they did not. And it's not telling us what it appeared like to the disciples or to the Romans. It's just saying this is how it appeared to the unbelievers. And the verses also do not say that Jesus was taken bodily. And I quoted Madudi on that, who even agreed that the verses aren't saying Jesus was taken bodily, and he may have been taken just the soul or soul and body. You can't tell from the Quran. So that was my first point, that Surah 4:157 is not a straight out denial. My second point was to look at the word tawafa and how it's used in Surah 3:55 and 5:117. And we looked at all of the references there. There are 22 other references. And on every occasion, it has to do with the taking of the soul and to do with death. And even when the taking of the soul in sleep, it has to do with death, because if Allah doesn't give the soul back, you'll stay dead. And so it always has to do with death. And Surah 3:55 and 5:117, when you read them, are all about Jesus being taken, which is the crucifixion event. And so my argument was that we need to take all of the verses about the same event together, and that when we do this, we see that it's Allah taking the soul of Jesus, or Jesus dying as a martyr and the Quran describing his death as a martyr, or something like that. But as Rudolph brought up in his presentation, the Quran claims to not just show you what appears to be the case, but it tells you things from God's perspective, the unseen. So there's the seen, which is what appears to be the case, but also the unseen. And the Quran tells you the unseen realities. And this is my understanding, that the Quran's description of the crucifixion is describing the unseen realities of that event, and how it was God who took Jesus and no one else. So I'll finish up there. Thank you for being involved today, and I hope that everyone has found this helpful.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Shabir, will conclude with you. So you have your 4 minutes for your concluding statement.
Well, I'm so glad that we did this today. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you. Thank you, Dave, for being such an excellent moderator. Thank you, Yusuf, for having me on board, and the South African Debate Initiative more generally. Thank you, Reverend Samuel and Rudolph, for being in this panel, and for welcoming me to be a dialogue participant with you. I really enjoyed this, and I learned a lot from listening to both of you gentlemen, from all of you. And let's do this again. Now, as for the matters which we discussed, I hear from Reverend Samuel and Rudolph a very respectful approach towards the Quran, and a keen interest in tying together verses to interpret other verses, and that is all respectable. Their conclusion is also a respectable one that is shared by many academics today. The conclusion that Jesus is not, the Quran is not denying that Jesus was crucified, but the Quran is giving a different perspective by saying that it is God who supervised the entire activity, and it is God who is in control of all of this. It's not the enemy who killed Jesus, but it was God who took Jesus in his own good time and according to his own plan. But while that is a respectable position that's held by many academics, I've argued for a different position, which I believe is more in congruence with more of the Quranic verses. For example, Surah 5, verse number 33. And I did not hear either Reverend Samuel or Rudolph actually interacting with Surah 5, verse 33, which juxtaposes the term for killing and the term for crucifixion, and shows them to be two alternatives. And the best explanation for these to be alternatives is to say that crucifixion there means killing by means of impaling or hanging or affixing to a cross. And the same meaning has to apply to the same two juxtaposed words which are in Surah 4, verse 157, where it says, they killed him not, nor did they crucify him. In this case too, crucify must mean that the denial must mean that they did not kill him by means of crucifixion, which allows for Jesus to be on the cross, but he must have been taken down alive. Now, Reverend Samuel says, but look at Surah 3, verse 55 and Surah 5, verse 117. Notice that I mentioned these verses in my opening presentation towards the end. And as I pointed out, these verses do not necessarily mean that Jesus died on the cross, even if we take them to mean that Jesus died. But literally, the term tawaffa refers to taking, and it can mean the taking of a soul, as we find in Surah 6, verse number 60. And we mentioned Surah 39 as well. I believe the first number there was 42. And Samuel agrees that, yes, it mentions there, but he's saying, oh, but it always has to do with death. But no, in these two cases, it has to do with sleep. So it is possible that God takes the soul in sleep and returns the soul. And Samuel says, well, this is a particularly Islamic concept, that death is the sister of sleep. But notice that in the Bible, in many verses, sleep is akin to death. For example, in one of the most famous passages in the Bible is where Paul says that Jesus has been seen by over 500 witnesses, most of whom are still alive, but some have fallen asleep. Fallen asleep here means that they died. It's another way of speaking of death. So I think the idea that sleep is akin to death is shared by Muslims and Christians. And when the Quran is speaking about God taking Jesus, it's more appropriate to say that God took him in sleep. God rescued him from his enemies and saved him from being killed on the cross. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Shabir, and thank you to each of our speakers. So just a big thank you for all the preparation that you've been putting in over the last couple of days and weeks. And also thanks so much for the respectful tone of the discussions. It really was great engagement, great to be together again. And we're looking forward to future debates in the future. So also a thank you to all of our online viewers. We hope that you really enjoyed these discussions and that they were really fruitful, and we're looking forward to engaging in the future. So from my side, to everyone, to the speakers, and to everyone who's online, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world.